Chapter 111. On the martial arts stage, Wei Huan's water dragon saber and Yale's stone axe were locked in a stalemate. One was a young recruit from the vanguard of the Central Plains, while the other was a brutal veteran of the Western Chang tribe. Even though Wei Huan's saber skills were outstanding, he lacked actual combat experience. Moreover, his opponent was a strong man who could lift 1,000 kilograms. Compared to Wei Huan's agility, Yale's stone axe was huge and heavy. It seemed to be chopping without any pattern. The stone axe looked clumsy, but he was strong. When Wei Huan dodged, the stone axe smashed into the ground, leaving a crack in the shear too. Wei Huan's physical strength gradually couldn't keep up. He was young and not as strong as Warlord. He couldn't hold on for long with this kind of reckless chopping and smashing. Apart from leaving a scar on Yale's face, he couldn't even get close to his opponent. After all, his opponent was wearing armor. This was an unfair battle to begin with. More and more wounds appeared on Wei Huan's body, but Tile didn't want to take his life. Every time he was about to hit Wei Huan, he would just miss by a few centimeters. Although he didn't hit any vital points, Wei Huan was still covered in wounds. It was like a cat catching a mouse. Once it caught it, it wasn't in a hurry to eat it. It had to play with the mouse until it was exhausted before it swallowed it. This was simply a one-sided slaughter. Below the stage, Shen Han saw the situation and clenched his fists until they cracked. He was about to step forward, but was stopped by Rida Musi. The vulture-like muscular man leaned on his horse with a bloodthirsty smile. "Instructor, you can't help." Shen Han pulled out his saber. "What? You want to fight with me too?" Rida Musi laughed, his gaze sinister. "Of course I want to. I'll accompany you to the end." A group of Chang soldiers surrounded the martial arts stage. Once the Liangzhou Guard recruits wanted to help, these Chang soldiers would fight with them. Even if they could, it would be too late. On the stage, Wei Huan's vision was slowly blurring. He was getting slower and slower to dodge the attacks behind him. His strength was quickly draining. He couldn't dodge in time and was hit in the right leg by Yale's axe. The pain pierced his heart, but he restrained himself and didn't make a sound. Warlord walked in front of him. Wei Huan had no more strength to run. He saw Warlord looking down at him like a butcher looking at a lamb on the chopping board. Warlord said, "Tisk, it's over so quickly. How boring. The people of the Central Plains are so weak. They can't even compare to a finger of the Chang tribe." Wei Huan didn't speak. Large drops of sweat seeped out of his forehead, mixing with the blood on his face. He looked extremely miserable. "Don't worry, it won't hurt." Vala licked his lips and stared at him greedily. "When this stone hits you, your brain juice will fly out. It's beautiful. But you won't see it." After saying that, he waved his huge axe and went straight for Wei Huan's head. "Wei Huan!" Ma Damei shouted. Before Wei Huan entered the vanguard, he was the one who had led him. He wanted to save Wei Huan but was stopped by a Xichang man. Wei Huan's life was in danger. At this moment, behind the martial arts practice stage, there was a leafy banyan tree. Even though it was winter, it didn't look yellow at all. Everyone was in front of the martial arts practice stage, so they didn't notice when someone was sitting in the banyan tree. By the time she saw it, that person was like a flash of lightning, swinging the towel tied to the tree like a swing. She let go of the towel in midair. Everything happened too quickly. She dashed to the front of the stage and kicked the axe that was aimed at Wei Huan's head. Relying on the inertia, even though Tile's body was strong, he was still knocked back by her side kick. The axe was heavy and sharp, injuring himself as well. If it wasn't for his outstanding strength that allowed him to stand firm after taking 2 steps back, this stone axe might have cut deeper. "He Yen," Wei Huan murmured. The Liang Province Guard recruits were also stunned. He Yen was locked up in the Liang Province Guard's dungeon because of the White Moon Mountain incident. How did he suddenly appear here? Was he released? Warlord looked at the person in front of him. The youth dressed in black had his hands on his hips. He tilted his head and smiled. You are too fierce. If I hadn't acted just now, my brother's head would have been gone. The new recruits of the Liang province guard viewed them as a thorn in their side, and because they had wiped out all the sentries, there was a blood feud. When they saw them, the rims of their eyes turned red. The best was Wei Huan's expressionless face, but this youth was all smiles as if nothing had happened. A sliver of interest grew in Warlord, as if he had found a new prey. And who are you? He asked. The black-clothed youth brushed his messy hair and smiled. I am He Yen. I was first in the Liang province guard's battle for the flag. She looked at Warlord. Perhaps you don't know what a battle for the flag is. It doesn't matter. You only need to remember that I am first in the Liang province guard. First? Below the stage, Rida Musi looked at her with narrowed eyes. You? In the end, He Yen looked too short and skinny. If Warlord and Wei Huan stood together like a strong tiger and a lamb, then He Yen, who looked even weaker than Wei Huan, was like a chicken and an eagle when compared to Warlord. My apologies, I came a bit late. What are you all doing? The youth smiled at Yen Yen. If you were sparring, it would be a waste of resources to find someone else and not me. Warlord laughed loudly. You really boast shamelessly. He Yen. Shen Han called out to him. Head instructor Shen. He Yen looked at him. I've been suppressing a bellyful of anger these past few days with nowhere to vent. It's good to have a fight to vent my anger. Head instructor, please make an exception and stop blocking me. Shen Han had nothing to say. Rida Musi had come for the new recruits of the Liang State Guard. Since she wasn't willing to let the instructor go, she could only let the new recruits go. Among the new recruits, other than He Yen, there weren't many who could fight her. Some had outstanding skills, but lacked actual combat experience. Those with actual combat experience were older, and their stamina was not as good as the younger ones. He Yan's martial arts were peerless, and his mind was nimble. He already had a high chance of winning. It was good that he had attracted the attention of the Chang people on the stage. More importantly, He Yen said, may I ask if we are sparring now? If that's the case, how about I replace this brother of mine? You? That's right. I am the first in the Liang province guard. Defeating me is better than defeating him. He Yen glanced at Wei Huan on the ground. Won't you feel more accomplished? The Western Chang people below the stage laughed loudly. Rida Musi looked at him. I really like this person's temperament. Let him go. He Yen said, men, please carry this brother away. Wei Huan was carried away. As he was being carried away, he looked at He Yen and said in a low voice, you, be careful. He Yen said, got it. On the high platform of the martial arts practice field, there were only 2 people left. As the recruits below the stage watched, they all broke out in cold sweat for He Yen. In the past half a year, He Yen had been in the limelight more than once or twice. Some people sincerely admired and worshipped her, while others were jealous of her. However, at this moment, the Liang province guard recruits were united against a common enemy. They only hoped that she could defeat them. Voila, show those Chang people who are not to be trifled with. Let them know that the Liang province guard is not to be trifled with. The recruits below the stage were on tenterhooks, but He Yen on the stage was still undecided. She smiled and said, oh right, I don't know what the stakes are for this competition. I'll say it first. How about this? If I lose, I'll be at your disposal. If you lose, she thought of the youth in her memory and laughed. She said casually, you have to call me father. At this moment, the new recruits of the Liang province guard burst into laughter. Liang Ping was both worried and proud. You're still joking at a time like this. However, no one on Rida Musi's side could laugh. Warlord looked at He Yen darkly. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said, "We don't need stakes. There will be 3 rounds. The loser will die, and the winner will live. This is the rule. Regardless of life or death." He Yen said. "Why, are you scared?" "Not really." He Yen said, "Instructor, throw me a steel whip. I want a long one." Shen Han grabbed the longest steel whip from the weapon rack and threw it over. He Yen caught it and played with it in her hands. She looked at Warlord. "Can I use a weapon?" "Yes." Warlord sneered. "But are you sure you don't want to use a sword? A whip can't kill." The youth's lips curled. "It's enough to kill you." Before Warlord could understand the meaning of her words, he saw the youth suddenly rush over with the whip. Warlord was stunned, then laughed loudly. He raised his giant axe to meet the youth head-on. The youth rushed forward but did not make a move. He only lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot to avoid the attack of the stone axe. He circled behind Warlord and waited for Warlord to turn around before swinging the axe and dodging to the side. She seemed to be taking the initiative, but she didn't attack. The whip coiled around her hand. She seemed to be circling Warlord for some reason. In a flash, she turned and ran. Warlord followed. As soon as he lifted his foot, he felt something wrapped around his foot. He lost his balance and fell to the side. But this big guy reacted quickly. When he realized that He Yan's whip had coiled around his foot, he tried to steady himself. But He Yan didn't give him the chance. She carried the whip behind her back and pulled it hard as if she was transporting goods. Warlord couldn't support himself anymore. His body was huge and clumsy. Both his feet were steady. When one of his legs lost balance, the other leg couldn't be steady. In addition, He Yan pulled from the other side. With a dong sound, he fell to the ground. The whip seemed to be as long as a person. He Yan didn't know how to use it. She pulled the whip from under Warlord's body and it easily returned to her hand. She didn't stop walking. She rushed to Warlord and reached out. She wrapped one hand around Warlord's neck and the whip coiled around his neck. Warlord subconsciously pulled. He Yan's hands tightened. The strength of his hands couldn't be underestimated after throwing rocks all day long. The strange strongman was wearing armor, but his neck wasn't covered. Ordinary flesh was also the weakest part. After all, he wasn't really made of steel. The people in the martial arts arena only heard a crack that made one's teeth ache. Warlord's head drooped limply. "You're not human. You're an animal," He Yan said in a low voice. "So, to kill you, a whip is enough." She raised her head again. Although she was smiling, her eyes were cold. She looked at the people below the arena and calmly said, "He's dead. I've won. Victory and defeat have been decided." Next. On the martial arts arena, the situation suddenly changed. Just now, Warlord had tortured and killed Wei Huan like a cat playing with a mouse. He didn't deliver the final blow for a long time. He probably didn't expect that he would die at the hands of this seemingly weak youth in front of him. How long did it take to kill a person? A cup of tea, a stick of incense, or a quarter of an hour? It didn't take any of those. The recruits of the Liangzhou Guard knew that He Yan was powerful. The scene of her sparring with Huang Xiong and Jiang Jiao was still vivid in their minds. However, the He Yan in front of them seemed different from the He Yan who had sparred on the martial arts arena. When this youth stopped joking, he was cold and chilling. His body carried a murderous aura that couldn't be looked at directly. She smiled and said, "There's no need for fancy performances on the battlefield. Think clearly about how to kill, then you can act." Her gaze fell on Rida Muzi. Rida Muzi returned her gaze. Slowly, the Liangzhou recruits below the arena came to their senses. One after another, they said excitedly, "He Yan won. He Yan killed Warlord. He Dage is amazing." Qing Lisu was caught, but she didn't forget to cheer for He Yan. beat them until their heads were swollen. Liang Ping and Ma Damei looked at each other. He Yan's speed of killing was too fast, even for a genius. You guys. That youth stood on the high platform and smiled at the Xichang people. Could it be that you guys can't afford to lose? Who's next? No one from the Xichang people spoke for the time being. She smiled again, this time with a hint of provocation. I know that it's a bit scary to gamble with one's life. I didn't expect that the fearless warriors of Xichang would have a time when they don't dare to go on stage. But it doesn't matter. The people of the Dawei Central Plains have always been kind and benevolent. If you really don't want to admit defeat, just like what I said just now, call me father and this competition will end. How about it? But, who's going to call me father? He Yan stared at Rida Musi. You're their leader. Why don't you call me father? Bastard! A soldier behind Rida Musi stepped forward and shouted angrily. He Yan wasn't afraid at all. He said innocently, can't I do that? Wang Ba said softly, that's so satisfying. She's purposely angering her opponent. Huang Xiong said in a low voice, but, in this situation, it doesn't seem necessary. He Yan's personality had always been arrogant and confident. In the past, people thought that he was just a teenager. In this situation, angering Rida Musi wasn't a good thing. I'll compete with you. A voice sounded from behind Rida Musi. Commander, Ba Zhou is willing to fight. Rida Musi glanced at him. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. She only said, go. This man called Ba Zhou went up to the high platform of the martial arts arena. He was different from Warlord. Although Ba Zhou was muscular, he wasn't as big as Warlord. He was also older than Warlord. He was about 30 years old. His whole body was covered in a black cloak. Even his head was hidden under a curtain hat. Half of his chin was exposed. His eyebrows and eyes weren't very clear. His whole person looked pale and strange, like a ghost. His voice was also hoarse, as if it had been burned by fire. It was as unpleasant as a crow's cry. Ba Zhou walked to Yla's side. Although they were both partners, he didn't have any sympathy. He kicked Yla's corpse off the high platform of the martial arts arena and scolded, "You're a hindrance." Yla's corpse rolled down. He didn't even look at it. He only said to He Yan, "You have old injuries." He Yan's heart sank. This man called Ba Zhou was more difficult to deal with than Warlord. Warlord was nothing more than a brute force warrior who didn't know how to adapt. To deal with this kind of person, as long as one grasped his weakness and attacked, the battle would quickly end. In every battle, the most frightening thing was to meet an enemy with brains like the one in front of him. He was able to discover his opponent's weakness. This way, he would be able to control his next move. He slowly raised the knife in his hand. He Yan wrapped the iron whip around his hand and rushed towards his opponent. In the battle between Wei Huan and Warlord, He Yan was a spectator. He saw Yla's weakness and shortcomings in advance. Thus, when he fought with Warlord, he was able to quickly, accurately, and ruthlessly finish off his opponent. In this match, Ba Zhou was someone she had never seen before. However, this person had seen everything clearly when Ba Zhou fought with her. In other words, Ba Zhou understood He Yan, but He Yan knew nothing about Ba Zhou. He Yan seemed to be hiding many other things under his cloak. He Yan was on guard. This person was also very cunning. He didn't directly clash with He Yan. With Yla's example, he kept a distance from He Yan. As long as the whip swung towards him, Ba Zhou would quickly change direction. His body was much more agile than Yla's. For a moment, the iron whip couldn't get close. He Yan's waist was already faintly hurting. Previously, when she was in Liangzhou City, she had been injured when she fought with Ding Yi. Later, she was tricked by a traitor to White Moon Mountain and fought with the person hiding in the dark. After several times, the wound that was originally about to heal had long since split open. That wasn't all. After that, she was thrown into the Yangzhou guard's dungeon. In the dungeon, there wouldn't be Shin Mushue delivering medicinal soup every day. It was cold and damp. Her wound had probably worsened. Just now, when she killed Warlord, she used too much strength and pulled on her wound. It was fine for a short period of time, but after a long period of fighting with Ba Zhou, she felt more and more pain that pierced her bones. Ba Zhou smiled and said, "Why do you look so pale? Is it because the old injury on your waist is acting up?" He Yan was startled. The curved blade in Ba Zhou's hand had already wrapped around her iron whip, pulling He Yan forward. The audience below the stage cried out in alarm. With the blade in one hand, Ba Zhou's other hand unhesitatingly struck at the old injury on He Yan's waist. He Yan received a solid slap, but his movements didn't stop. The whip in his hand loosened, curling towards his face. It was evaded by Ba Zhou, but it rolled off his veiled hat, revealing this person's face. The two of them simultaneously retreated and stood still. That palm was firmly pressed against her old injury. He Yan forced herself to swallow the blood in her throat. A slight smile still hung on her face. Looking at the person in front of her, she mocked, "Tisk, so ugly." Without the veiled hat, Ba Zhou's true face was revealed. Half of this person's face was fine and could be considered handsome. However, the other half of his face had been burned by fire and was full of potholes. There were dark red scars that looked like centipedes growing on his face and squeezing his facial features out of place. Below the stage, someone cried out in alarm. He Yan had knocked off her veiled hat and exposed her true face. Ba Zhou's expression was extremely ugly. Staring at He Yan, he wanted nothing more than to eat He Yan's flesh and drink her blood. He Yan smiled and crooked her finger at him. Again. Ba Zhou sneered and rushed over. The moment He Yan moved, she knew it was not good. Ba Zhou did not show any mercy when he hit her just now. Now blood was seeping out. Fortunately, she had changed into Lei Ho's black clothes to keep herself warm. Even if she was bleeding, it would not be obvious. But if this continued, she didn't know how long she could last. In fact, the sparring on the stage was never the main point. The main point was to use these three sparring to buy more time. If no one could withstand the scimitar of the Xichang people, it would become a one-sided massacre. Then, there would be no chance for the rest of the matches. She must kill Ba Zhou in order to have the third match. The Xichang people were good at using scimitars. Everyone's scimitar would be adjusted according to their body size and strength. Ba Zhou's scimitar tended to be more flexible. It would be difficult for He Yan's iron whip to wrap around his scimitar. He Yan's whip wrapped around Ba Zhou's leg. Ba Zhou scornfully said, "You are too naive if you think you can use the same move on two people." After saying that, he went around He Yan and slashed his scimitar towards He Yan's neck. Different from Warlord, Ba Zhou was aiming for He Yan's life from the beginning. There was no false move at all. He Yan pulled the whip with both hands and held Ba Zhou's scimitar in front of his eyes. Ba Zhou laughed sinisterly and fell back. He Yan could not dodge in time. He saw Ba Zhou's right hand pull out a dagger from his cloak. This dagger was only as long as a person's thumb. It was as thin as paper. Rather than a dagger, it was more like a blade. If one was not close enough, it would be hard to see it clearly. Ba Zhou loosened his palm. In the eyes of others, he only slapped He Yan's waist. But other than He Yan, no one knew that the sharp weapon in his palm had pierced into his flesh. He Yan only felt a piercing pain in his waist. He clenched his fist and punched. Ba Zhou's face was right in front of him. He laughed sinisterly and said, "Does it hurt? If it hurts, then you..." His words stopped abruptly. He Yan clenched his fist and pressed it against Ba Zhou's throat, refusing to let go. Ba Zhou struggled frantically. But unknowingly, the iron whip had tied He Yan's leg to his. He had no way to escape. He struggled fiercely. But the more he struggled, the more his eyes rolled back. In the end, he vomited blood and gradually stopped moving. He Yan's face was expressionless. He pressed his fist against Ba Zhou's throat again. After confirming that the person under him was no longer breathing, he released his hand. There was a little iron-like thing on Ba Zhou's neck. It was just a little bit. The rest could not be seen. It must have been inserted deep into his throat. It was an iron caltrop. He Yan picked it up on the ground when he came here. There were only advantages and no disadvantages to placing some hidden weapons on one's body at any time. No one knew what kind of enemy they would encounter. They also did not know what kind of things they would encounter next and when they would encounter them. The only thing they could do was to increase their chances of survival. She couldn't get close to Ba Zhou, because Ba Zhou was already on guard against her. Her final strike would be nothing more than a lose-lose strategy that would injure both sides. But she was still better than Ba Zhou. She was only injured by the old dagger wound on her waist. But Ba Zhou was already dead. You have a trump card. How do you know that I don't? She muttered. After a while, He Yan pulled the iron whip out from Ba Zhou's body with difficulty. She wrapped it around her wrist again. She stood up. She was wearing a black outfit. It was not as lively as when she was wearing the red outfit. She looked more stern. She also stood up straight. She did not look tired at all. She played with the iron whip on her wrist. She smiled faintly and said the same words as before. He is dead. I have won. The winner has been decided. Next. Chapter 112. The people below didn't see clearly how He Yan and Ba Zhou were able to determine victory and defeat. They only saw the two of them wrestling. Ba Zhou hit He Yan, and He Yan used some kind of hidden weapon to stab Ba Zhou's neck. Although his method was not honorable, he won in the end. Big brother, he is so powerful. Cheng Lisu was the first to shout. Good fight. Good fight. Shut up. Song Tao Tao scolded him from the side. Cheng Lisu was dissatisfied. What's wrong with me cheering for my big brother? Now is not the time to relax. Song Tao Tao shook her head. Girls were more observant than boys. She felt that He Yan's face was paler than before. Her heart skipped a beat, thinking that He Yan might be injured. However, He Yan was wearing black, so she could not see where he was injured. On the stage, the young man in black raised his chin slightly and asked with a smile, "No one dares to come up?" At this moment, Rida Musi suddenly laughed out loud. He clapped his hands as he laughed. Interesting, interesting. I didn't expect there to be such an interesting person in the Liang Province Guards. Before he finished speaking, he rode his horse towards the martial arts stage. His movements were swift, and the people around him were caught off guard. A few Liang Province recruits were almost trampled by his horse, but fortunately, they were pulled back by the people beside them. Rida Musi suddenly stopped his horse when he was one step away from the martial arts stage, and flew onto the stage. He landed in front of He Yan. Commander, don't tell me you want to fight personally. The young man was surprised. I'm just a recruit. How can I do that? You killed 2 of my brave warriors. You don't look like an ordinary recruit. Rida Musi laughed. He was not at all displeased by the loss of his beloved generals. I was just lucky. No need to be humble. I saw you fight with the 2 of them just now. You deserve to be number 1 in the Liang Province Guards. As Rida Musi spoke, he looked at the people below the martial arts stage and laughed disdainfully. I think you're the only one here who deserves to be brave and resourceful. However, he changed the topic. I wonder how long the wound on your waist can last. He Yan said nothing. Rida Musi looked at her with great interest. Ba Zhou is my most capable subordinate. He attacked your waist twice in a row just now. It seems that he has an old injury. The last time, when you stabbed the hidden weapon into his throat, he walked to Ba Zhao's side and used his foot to poke at Ba Zhao's corpse. Ba Zhao turned over. His hand loosened. Something stabbed into your waist. Was it a knife? Rida Muko asked her with concern. Ouch, it must be very painful. Actually, it's not that bad. He Yen smiled. Not as painful as him. Rida Muko stared at her for a while and smiled. Very good. I like tough bones like you the most. It'll be especially sweet when you're broken. Just like what Ba Shou had done to Warlord, he kicked Ba Shou's corpse off the stage and chuckled, useless trash. Then, Ba Zhao slowly pulled out the scimitar at his waist. Seeing this, Shen Han's gaze hardened. He said angrily, Rida Muzi, as a commander, how can you fight with a recruit of the Liang State Guard? If you want to spar, I'll accompany you. You? Rida Muzi slowly shook her head. Not as good as him. I want him. This is he. He Yen. Head instructor Shen, let me do it, He Yen said. Actually, it didn't matter what she said to Shen Han. Rida Muzi had already set her eyes on He Yen. That was the worst thing, but at the same time, it was fortunate enough that they would have more time. Don't you want to change your weapon? Rida Muzi smiled. My scimitar will break your whip. Maybe my whip will break your scimitar, He Yen said with a smile. She held the whip in front of her eyes with both hands. The Chang soldiers used scimitars. Everyone's scimitars were different. Rida Muzi's scimitar was extremely long. It was half a person's height. It had been drenched in the blood of countless people. It had a dark red color. As soon as the scimitar was unsheathed, the sunlight fell on it. It smelled of blood. He Yen could only choose the whip. In the years she had fought against the Chang people, she had always used a sword. Anyone here who had seen General Feihong would be able to recognize that her swordsmanship was exactly the same as General Feihong. As for using a scimitar, the Chang people were the best at using scimitars. Using a scimitar in front of them was no different from using one's weakness to attack their strength. It was just asking for trouble. After thinking about it, the iron whip was the most convenient choice. Rida Muzi rushed over with his scimitar. His steps were fast. What didn't match his muscular body was that his movements were very nimble. It was also very clever. The distance was just right where He Yan's whip couldn't touch him. He Yan's whip wanted to wrap around his scimitar. Rida Muzi dodged it and slashed at the iron whip with his scimitar. Bang! Although the iron whip did not break, it was unavoidably frightening. If this continued, no one knew how long this whip could last. The weapons on the weapons rack were for the soldiers to practice martial arts. It was good as long as they were sturdy and durable. However, Rida Muzi's scimitar was obviously a treasured scimitar. It couldn't be compared. He laughed and slashed with his scimitar. He Yan's whip wrapped around the scimitar but didn't drag it. Rida Muzi was too strong. He said, naive. He pulled the scimitar towards himself. He Yan's body couldn't help but fly towards him. Ahigo, be careful. Xiao Mai couldn't help but blurt out. He Yan flew towards Rida Muzi. Seeing that he was about to collide with Rida Muzi's scimitar, the youth suddenly smiled. He twirled his whip and slipped under the scimitar. He slapped Rida Muzi's face. She borrowed the force of flying over and swept past Rida Muzi's head. She rolled on the ground before stopping. The hearts of the people below the stage finally returned to their stomachs. Rida Muzi slowly turned his head. He was born fierce and ruthless. At this moment, He Yan's scimitar on his face made him bleed. Blood flowed down his cheeks. Rida Muzi didn't seem to care. He wiped his face carelessly and licked the blood stains on the side of his lips. He stared at He Yan and said, "You are really powerful." His voice was very soft. However, when it fell into the ears of the people, it made their hair stand on end. He Yan said, same to you. The wound on her waist was very painful. When she rolled just now, the scimitar that pierced into her body was even deeper. However, she couldn't pull out the scimitar now. Firstly, there was no time for her to pull out the scimitar. Secondly, if she pulled it out, the blood wouldn't stop and she would lose her strength soon. But now, He Yen wasn't as relaxed as he appeared to be. The scimitar that Ba Zhou had stabbed into her body wasn't long. It was short and delicate, about the width of an index finger. Moreover, it was inserted horizontally. Although it didn't hit a vital point, it just happened to cover the old wound. The original wound split open. When she fought with someone on the martial arts field, it affected her skin and flesh. The scimitar pierced deeper. It was no different from feeling her flesh being cut open while she was awake. She lowered her head and quickly bit her lips. The color of blood appeared on her lips again. It looked like she was that high-spirited youth again. How much longer can you hold on? Raidamuzi wasn't worried. He smiled and said, your sweat is about to dry. Is that so? He Yen touched it. Maybe the weather is too hot. Raidamuzi slowly raised his scimitar and pounced over with a hideous smile. Your blood will also be completely drained. He Yen rushed up. The Liang province guard recruits below were all on tenterhooks. When He Yen faced Raidamuzi, he wasn't as skillful as when he faced the previous two. On the other hand, Raidamuzi was cunning and cruel. No matter how powerful He Yen was normally, in the end, he was only a 16-year-old half-grown child. Jiang Jiao muttered, he can't hold on anymore. He might be injured. Huang Xiong frowned. If there's really no other way, he touched the golden scimitar on his back. We'll rush up together. We can't just watch him die in vain. Wang Ba scolded, fuck. Why didn't these instructors stop him? Why did they let a young boy fight? Aren't they ashamed? Shen Han stood in the crowd and stared at He Yan's figure. The paper in his hand was about to be crushed. Liang Ping beside him was extremely anxious. He whispered, head instructor, we can't keep waiting like this. We can't let the Western Chang people take charge. Why don't act on your own. Shen Han shouted. Wait a little longer. Wait? Wait for what? On the stage, He Yen and Raidamuzi exchanged more than 10 moves again. Her movements were not as fast as before. It was obvious that she was moving slowly. She grazed Raidamuzi's arm a few times with her scimitar. Every time, she narrowly avoided it, but in the end, she was injured. However, the smile on her face did not change from the beginning to the end. It was as if this was not a bloody battle of life and death. It was just a casual and happy spar with her companions after the day training. This made Raidamuzi puzzled. He said, are all Central Plainsmen as good at putting on an act as you? Not really. He Yan's voice was a little unsteady from the pain. She smiled and said, I'm especially good at putting on an act. Raidamuzi's smile was not as relaxed as before. He Yan did not dare to let down her guard against him. When they fought against the Western Chang people in the past, the other party's commander, Raidamuzi, was brutal and cruel. He reaped countless souls with a scimitar. Wherever he went, bones were piled up. Raidamuji's favorite thing to do was to chop off the heads of captives with his scimitar and tie them to the tail of his mount. The bloody heads of the dead were enough to become the nightmares of many Central Plainsmen. The Fuyue army led by He Yan and the Chang army led by Raidamuji fought many fierce battles. Every time they fought, He Yan could sense how cunning and terrifying the other party was. In the final battle, Raidamuji died at the hands of He Yan. When he was alive, he loved to chop off other people's heads. He probably did not expect that after his death, his head would be chopped off by others and placed in a box inlaid with pearls and jade. He would be brought to the imperial palace in the capital and sent to the emperor. He would become a general in exchange for a generous reward. After Raidamuji's death, the Western Chang had no leader. Soon, the rebellion was quelled. And the man in front of him named Raida Muzi had the same face as Raida Muji. He Yen had seen Raida Muji die with his own eyes. He would not come back from the dead. Moreover, Raida Muji's eyes were dark green, while Raida Muzi's eyes were dark blue. He Yen recalled that he had heard that Raida Muji had a twin brother who was born with brute strength and was vicious. However, he did not get along with Raida Muji's brother. He left a long time ago and his whereabouts were unknown. Now, it seemed that this was Raida Muji's twin brother, Raida Muzi. He probably knew about his brother's death. Perhaps he had obtained the remnants of the Chang army, which was why he brought his men to the Liangzhou guard. He was also cunning. He found out from a spy that Xiao Ju was not in the Liangzhou guard. The new soldiers here were young and inexperienced. That was why he dared to be so brazen. However, Raida Muzi was not a fool. No matter how brave and arrogant his subordinates were, 1,000 of them could not win against the tens of thousands of elite soldiers of the Liangzhou guard. Therefore, his men should be far more than this. This was a trap that had been set up long ago against the Liangzhou guard. In front of the guard station was Mount Baiyue, and behind it was Wulu River. If they had an army, it would be impossible for them to cross from Mount Baiyue in such heavy snow. Therefore, it was most likely that they would take the closest water route at night and cross over. He Yen had never seen Raida Muzi before, but he had fought with Raida Muji many times and knew this person's background. This person loved to set up arenas and say that he wanted to spar with the other party. In reality, his methods were vicious. The martial artists of the Central Plains who walked the righteous path would most likely lose to him. In this way, they would lose their morale before the battle even started. Once they were afraid of the Chang people, they would most likely be defeated. Back then, many Dewei generals had fallen for Raida Muji's tricks. All was fair in war. Morale was the most important. He Yen could see that although Raida Muzi was not on good terms with his brothers, his methods were the same as before. The new soldiers of the Liangzhou guard would not be able to avoid a fierce battle with Raida Muzi's subordinates today. She had already done everything she could. The last thing was to gather enough morale for the men of Dewei on this training field. With morale, they would be able to display their true strength in their first battle. I hate pretentious people of the Central Plains the most. Raida Muzi finally lost his patience. He looked into the distance as if he was waiting for some news. However, he did not receive anything. He turned his head and said, "Let's end this quickly." He Yen smiled and said, "That's exactly what I was thinking." She reached out and tied the belt tighter. The belt covered the wound and prevented too much blood from flowing out. However, at the same time, it was more painful and uncomfortable. Raida Muzi looked at her actions and suddenly said, "You remind me of someone." He Yen asked, "Who?" "Although I have never seen him, I heard from my unlucky brother that there was a general called Hirufei in the Central Plains. When he was shot on the battlefield, he could pull out the arrow shaft and continue to command the battle. In the end, he died at the hands of Hirufei. You are very similar to that person." He Yen heard this and smiled. "Wrong. I am not Hirufei. I am not like him." She glanced at the people of Liangzhou below the stage. "However, the men of Dewei are all like me. As long as they do not die, they will fight to the end. There will be thousands of General Feihong in the Central Plains. Your Western Chang." She looked up and said with a mocking tone, "How many can you produce?" After saying this, she waved her iron whip and charged straight at Raida Muzi. Raida Muzi sneered and did not take it to heart. In his opinion, He Yen was already injured. With old and new injuries, she was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Although her endurance was shocking, she could not hold on for much longer. The scimitar and the iron whip intertwined, producing the sound of metal colliding. "Brother He." Xiao Mai's heart tightened as she watched from below the stage. She did not dare to let go. He Yan's movements became faster. She waved her whip faster and faster. She was faster than Raidamuzi's scimitar. The scimitar was big and heavy. For an ordinary person, Raidamuzi's movements were already very fast. However, it was not as fast as the iron whip. The whip took advantage of the gap between the scimitar and the scimitar. It came from everywhere and hit Raidamuzi's face. It was only a bloody mark earlier. However, in just a moment, there were several more bloody marks on his face. Is this all you can do? Raidamuzi was angered by the continuous whipping. Her expression became violent. The scimitar went straight for Hyen's neck. However, Hyen was petite and dodged it easily. You are just as so. The young man even had the time to turn his head and tease her. What was going on? Raidamuzi was even more surprised. Why did it seem that as time passed, Hyen's movements became faster and faster? Wasn't he injured? How could he still be so agile and not be affected at all? Could it be that he was pretending before? This kid did not have any old injuries at all. Hyen dodged the tip of the scimitar. He tiptoed and circled behind Raidamuzi. This person was wearing armor and was incomparably hard. It was not that her whip did not hit Raidamuzi's body. It only landed on the armor and did not leave anything behind. Then, from head to toe, it would be as if he had nothing left but a single weakness. She narrowed her eyes and attacked Raidamuzi's back. Raidamuzi turned around and used her scimitar to block Hyen's iron whip, sending Hyen flying. However, in the blink of an eye, she used the force to pounce on Raidamuzi again. This was simply a suicidal fighting style. She only cared about attacking and did not care about defending. He can't be thinking of perishing together with her, right? Jiang Jiao muttered. In the eyes of outsiders, Hyen, who seemed to be staking everything on a single throw, was actually not that bad. On the contrary, Raidamuzi, who had the upper hand in the beginning, gradually fell into a disadvantage. This young man seemed to know the traces of his scimitar every time. Every time they exchanged blows, he dodged early. He also quickly captured the weakness of Raidamuzi's scimitar skills and took advantage of the weakness to attack, making Raidamuzi somewhat helpless. How old was he? He looked like he was 15 or 16 years old, but he could see her weakness in an instant. How terrifying was it to have an enemy? If this young man said that there were countless people like him in the Central Plains, what about Shi Chang? How many people did Shi Chang send out? There was no such genius, not a single one. In an instant, Raidamuzi actually had the intention to retreat. His morale was low. However, he had wronged Hyen on this point. No matter how powerful Hyen was, he would not be able to quickly determine the trajectory of his opponent's skills after exchanging blows a few times, let alone someone like Raidamuzi. It was perhaps because they were twins by blood, or perhaps because they learned from the same master, Raidamuzi's scimitar skills and Raidamuji's scimitar skills were exactly the same. Hyen had exchanged blows with Raidamuji countless times in his previous life. He knew himself and his enemy, and had long since memorized his moves. At this moment, it was convenient for him to deal with Raidamuzi. And Raidamuzi's fear because of this happened to fall into Hyen's trap. He was just giving him a taste of his own medicine. They were used to attacking the morale of others to boost their own morale. Now that they had finally experienced the feeling of being discouraged, this was a good opportunity. Hyen's whip lashed out faster and faster, to the point that the surrounding people were a little dizzy. Raidamuzi only felt that the iron whip seemed to have become a living snake, circling and dancing in front of him, its shadow was everywhere. His scimitar swung over, but it hit nothing but air. Instead, he was hit on the forehead by the whip. The real whip was here. He furiously slashed at Hyen, but the youth had already circled behind him. He had also done this when he was dealing with Warlord previously. Raidamuzi secretly cursed in his heart, but he saw that the iron whip was already flying in front of him, like a heavy shackle, and was about to wrap around his neck. Then, with another twist, his throat would be broken, and he would die like Warlord. In the nick of time, he shouted, Komuji. This seemed to be the name of one of his subordinates. In the next moment, a woman's exclamation suddenly sounded in the martial arts arena. It was Song Tao Tao, who was grabbed by the Chang people and threw her onto the martial arts arena. The Chang people had strong bodies and great strength. Song Tao Tao was only a slender little girl, so she was thrown up like a commodity. If she fell, even if she did not die, she would be seriously injured. No one below the arena could make it in time. He Yan's whip spun in front of Rida Musi's neck and flew towards Song Tao Tao. She also threw her body towards Song Tao Tao. The iron whip wrapped around Song Tao Tao's body. He Yan flew over and caught Song Tao Tao in her arms. The two of them fell heavily to the ground together. He Yan supported Song Tao Tao's body. With this fall, the wound on her waist deepened. She was caught off guard and let out a hiss sound. Big brother, be careful. Suddenly, Qing Lisu's shout rang out. He Yan. He go. Anxious voices came from all directions. Liang Ping's voice was extremely shrill. He Yan turned his head and saw a ray of light coming towards him. When she caught Song Tao Tao, her back was exposed. Rida Musi's scimitar fell fiercely and was about to cut her into two. He Yan pushed Song Tao Tao away and closed his eyes because of the wind from the scimitar. She no longer had the strength to move. Go to hell. Bang! There was no pain as expected, and there was no blood splattering. Something knocked the scimitar over, as if someone was blocking in front of her. He Yan slowly opened his eyes. A familiar dark blue figure with a silver-scaled python embroidered with silver thread stood in front of her. A young man stood in front of her. His posture was as straight as a pine tree, and he was calm and reassuring. The long sword in his hand had not been unsheathed. It was crystal clear like snow and flowed with a bright light. It was this narrow and thin autumn drinking sword that brushed away the murderous scimitar. Commander-in-Chief. Commander-in-Chief. It's the Commander-in-Chief. The crowd below the arena was shocked for a moment, then suddenly became excited. The Commander-in-Chief is back. Uncle. Xiao Ju is back. He Yan looked over and felt that her vision was blurry. She could not see clearly. Xiao Ju pulled her up from the ground. He Yan had no strength and leaned on him softly. Xiao Ju held her waist. He seemed to have noticed something and looked down. The young man in black seemed to be a little weak, but he didn't have any wounds. But at this moment, the hand that was holding He Yan's waist felt a wet patch. His hand was stained with blood. He paused slightly and slowly looked at Rida Musi. However, his words were directed at He Yan. His tone was as sarcastic as ever. Why do you always get yourself into such a miserable state every time I meet you? He Yan smiled and said softly, maybe it's because I know that you will come to save me every time. Chapter 113. Xiao Huaijin. Rida Musi looked at the person in front of her. Her gaze was uncertain. Fei Nu appeared behind him. Xiao Ju handed He Yan to him. Take them down. Fei Nu supported He Yan. Song Tao Tao climbed up and followed behind. The two of them arrived at the arena. There were people all around them. Fei Nu asked He Yan, can you still hold on? He Yan nodded. Sit down first. Fei Nu helped her to sit under a tree. The doctor will be here soon. Doctor? He Yan was puzzled. The Liangzhou guards only had one female doctor, Shinmu Xue. At this moment, she was being stared at by the Chang soldiers. Beautiful women always attracted attention in the military camp. She looked up at the arena. On the arena. Didn't you want to spar with me? Xiao Ju casually drew his sword. His black eyes looked at the person in front of him. He smiled slightly and said, go ahead. Rida Musi asked, are you Xiao Huaijin? Xiao Ju smiled. It's the real deal. Everyone knew that De Wei had two famous generals. General Fengyun Xiaohuijin and General Feihong Hirufei. However, just as He Yan had never fought with the southern barbarians, Xiao Zhu had never fought with the western Chang people. He had heard of his reputation, but it was his first time meeting him face to face. He had never seen Xiao Zhu's real appearance, and the news he had received before was that Xiao Zhu had gone to Zhangzhou. It was impossible for him to come back here in the time it took him to travel from Zhangzhou to Liangzhou. However, the sword in his hand did not look like an ordinary sword. Seeing that he did not move, Xiao Zhu raised his eyebrows. "Are you afraid?" Rita Musi sneered, "You're just putting on an act." She raised her saber and charged forward. However, the young man did not move at all. The sword in his hand was so cold and sharp that it was unstoppable. His movement was like a falling flower sweeping across, breaking the curved blade. It was so fast and fierce that it dazzled everyone who saw it. Rita Musi's morale had already been broken when he fought with He Yan earlier. At this moment, he was even more unable to cope with the situation and was forced to retreat. The autumn drinker's sword pierced straight into his chest. "Commander!" His subordinates cried out in alarm. Rita Musi retreated backward. He was not stabbed in the chest by Xiao Zhu, but his armor was cut open and he was picked up by the tip of the sword. In an instant, his chest was no longer covered by armor. "Warriors of Xichang." Xiao Zhu smirked and mocked, "That's all there is to it." Rita Musi was burning with anger, but he could tell that he was not Xiao Zhu's match from the exchange of blows just now. The Liangzhou guards were full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. He Yan was one of them just now. How could a new recruit be so capable? Who knew if there were others? There was no need to continue the sparring on the training field. This time, he had suffered a double loss. He had lost two of his favorite generals and his subordinates had seen him in such a sorry state. Now that his morale was low, any further delay would only cause more trouble. His main task was more important. He turned his head to look below the stage. But, why was there no movement? The young man elegantly wiped the blade of his sword and looked at him with a faint smile. "What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the report of the ambush by the Wulu River?" Rita Musi was shocked and slowly raised his head. "Then I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Xiao Zhu chuckled. His eyes were indifferent. "Komuji." Rita Musi quickly retreated and shouted, "Granary! Granary! There's no news." His subordinate's voice carried a hint of panic. "Commander, they're not back yet." Xiao Zhu was slightly stunned. Below the stage, someone laughed. Rita Musi looked towards the source of the voice and saw the culprit who almost caused her to fall just now. That black-clothed youth called He Yan revealed a pleased smile. Her voice was already very weak and soft, but her words were still so annoying. She said, "Secretly setting fire to other people's granary, this kind of behavior is too despicable. That's why there are archers ready there. Commander, your subordinates won't be able to return." They were already prepared. Rita Musi suddenly realized that something was wrong. He had prepared early and thought that he could reel in the net now. Little did he know that the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. He thought that he was the mantis, but he didn't know that there was an oriole behind. He had been tricked. He was afraid that Xiao Zhu's trip to Zhangzhou was fake. The Liangzhou guards' inability to withstand a single blow was also fake. Everything was fake. Everything was to trick them. The spy here had been exposed long ago. "We've been tricked. Let's go." He shouted to the people below the stage. "There's an ambush by the river." Ambush? The soldiers of the Chang tribe were confused. Weren't the ambush by the river their own people? They wanted to capture all the Liangzhou guards' recruits in one fell swoop. But what did this mean? "Since you're here," Xiao Zhu looked at him. "Don't leave." Rita Musi gritted his teeth and held his scimitar in front of him. At this point, the morale of the Western Chang tribe was low and they had fallen into a trap. The only thing they could do was fight to the death. However, there was hope as long as he was alive. If he could escape, he would definitely have a chance to make a comeback in the future. Warriors. He raised his scimitar. Kill them. Kill them all. The soldiers behind him all raised their scimitars and started a massacre. They fought with the Liangzhou guards recruits. Someone secretly set off a signal. The chimney flew up and exploded in the air. Rida Muzi turned around, wanting to take advantage of the chaos to escape. As soon as he turned around, he felt someone press down on his shoulder. Want to run? At this moment, the young commander-in-chief's facial features were stunningly beautiful. However, his smile was indifferent. Can you run? They began to fight. At this moment, they suddenly heard a deafening sound in front of them. Following the sound, they saw an army rushing over from the direction of the Wulu River. They were all dressed in black armor and black clothes. The person at the front was riding a horse and held a war flag with the word South written on it. It's the South Prefecture soldiers. The 9 Flags Battalion. The South Prefecture soldiers are here. He Yan could barely keep her eyes open. To prevent her from being hurt in the chaos, Fei Nu supported her and retreated. He Yan could only take a quick glance. An endless stream of South Prefecture soldiers came from the river as if they were endless. Reinforcements are here. Before she fainted, she looked in the direction of Xiaoju. There was only one thought in her mind. So, this was his plan. This was a tragic war. Rida Muzi was not stupid enough to only lead 1,000 soldiers to provoke the Liangzhou guards. He only occupied the village closest to the Wulu River and crossed the river overnight to set up an ambush. If the recruits of the Liangzhou guards could not hold them off and wanted to retreat, they would be like lambs in a tiger's den. However, man proposes, God disposes. Rida Muzi probably did not expect that when he was sparring with others at the training field, the ambush by the Wulu River did not go well. He originally thought that all the recruits were around the training field. However, for some reason, there was a crossbow team hidden in the forest by the Wulu River. When the Chang people appeared, they fired their arrows. The Chang people were confused and started to fight with the recruits. Then, Xiaoju, who was not supposed to return at this time, suddenly appeared and brought 10,000 South Prefecture soldiers with her. 10,000 soldiers of the Southern House against 10,000 Chang soldiers would not be an easy victory. However, if the Liangzhou Guards recruits were added with high morale and the invincible 9 Flags Battalion, they would be invincible. The situation that was originally thought to be a sure win was turned around in an instant. Rida Muzi's trusted subordinates had all died in battle. He knew that he would not be able to escape today and did not want to be a captive. Thus, he slit his own throat and committed suicide. With the death of their leader, the remaining Chang soldiers quickly abandoned their armor and fled like rats. It ended faster than expected. The training field of the Liangzhou Guards, the foot of Baiyue Mountain, beside the horse path, and by the Wulu River were all corpses. In this battle, the Liangzhou Guards also lost many recruits. The most tragic ones were probably the patrolling soldiers who were secretly killed last night. Next was the crossbowmen by the Wulu River. The Chang people were the first to clash with them. The living and lightly injured soldiers helped clean up the battlefield and carried out the corpses of their comrades. The heavily injured were sent to the medical hall and treated by Shen Muxue and her servants. Xiaoju walked out with Shen Han following behind her. Uncle. Qing Lisu was brought over by Qi Wu. She rushed over and said in a frightened voice, "Why are you only back now? You scared me to death. I thought I was going to die here today." Before Xiaoju could say anything, Qing Lisu saw Shen Han behind Xiaoju. She thought about how she had suffered at Shen Han's hands a few days ago. Now that her elder was here, she immediately complained, "Uncle Shen Jiaodo, if it wasn't for brother He, that blockhead would have started a massacre in the Liangzhou Guards. Brother he helped us, but in the end, Shen Jiaotou locked him up in the dungeon. It's too unfair. Dungeon? Xiao Zhu glanced at Shen Han. What happened? Shen Han felt a headache coming on. He replied. It's a long story. The situation was urgent, so I didn't dare to confirm He Yan's identity. You even accused him of murder. In the end, you captured Brother He and released the real murderer. My big brother has forgiven you and saved you today. You will have to apologize to him later. Enough, Xiao Zhu scolded. Qi Wu, take Qing Lisu back. Uncle, where are you going? I'm going to change my clothes. Xiao Zhu ignored him and said to Shen Han, follow me. I have something to ask you. He had rushed back in a hurry. He had not slept or rested. He had just experienced a fierce battle, so his body was covered in blood and dust. As soon as he returned to his room, he quickly bathed and changed into a clean set of clothes. Just as he walked out, he bumped into a young man in white. This young man was about the same age as Xiao Zhu. He had delicate features and a gentle demeanor. He always had a smile on his face. His clothes were embroidered with a red-crowned crane playing in the water. In the middle of winter, he held a folding fan and waved it gently. He did not mind the cold at all. When he saw Xiao Zhu, he smiled and said, "Are you injured? Do you want me to take a look?" Xiao Zhu raised her hand to stop him. "There's no need. There's a dying man next door. Take a look at that one." "Oh." The young man looked at the room next door and revealed an unwilling expression. "I, the white divine physician Lin Shuanghe, have only ever treated women. You are already an exception. We haven't seen each other for a few years. You want me to break the rules as soon as you arrive. Now you even want me to treat your soldiers. How am I any different from those doctors on the streets?" Xiao Zhu asked, "Are you going or not?" "I know what's wrong with one look. I have to bandage the wound first." Xiao Zhu glanced at him. "I said take his pulse first." "Xiao Huaijin, what's wrong with you now?" Lin Shuanghe was confused. "Are you going to control how I practice medicine now? Are you going to do it or not? Take it, take it, take it." Lin Shuanghe was suppressed by Xiao Zhu's gaze and had to take He Yan's pulse. As soon as he felt the pulse, his expression changed. At first, he couldn't believe his own feelings, so he checked twice. Finally, he looked at Xiao Zhu. Xiao Zhu raised her eyebrows. "That's right." Lin Shuanghe jumped up. "Xiao Zhu. You're keeping a mistress in your house." Xiao Zhu frowned and looked outside. "You're so loud. Are you afraid that not enough people know? Others don't know. Who knows now?" Lin Shuanghe asked in a low voice. "It's just the two of us. Fei knew this little sister is not bad." Lin Shuanghe was used to calling all the girls little sisters. He looked at He Yan in a different light. "I was wondering why you let her live next door. It turns out that you have an ulterior motive. What's the relationship between you two? We haven't seen each other for so long. You finally have a girl you like. Why didn't you tell me? Where is she from? Why did she come to the Liangzhou guards? It must be because of you, right? You too. Of course a girl needs to be hurt. You sent her to such a remote place to suffer. Are you even human?" Xiao Zhu couldn't take it anymore. "Are you done? If you say more, she'll stop breathing. How can you curse a little girl like that?" Lin Shuanghe scolded him. "Come here and help me take off her clothes. Find a piece of cloth to cover the rest of her body. Only her waist is exposed." Xiao Zhu almost thought that he had misheard. "What did you say?" "Come and help. Although the doctor doesn't have parents, I wouldn't care so much if she was just an ordinary girl." But she's your person. Of course you have to take it off. Otherwise, if something goes wrong in the future, you'll hate me and cause trouble for me. What do you mean she's my person? Xiaoju's veins throbbed. I have nothing to do with her. You're living together. What do you mean you have nothing to do with her? Since you already know her identity, you must have a close relationship. Hurry up. I just checked her pulse. Her condition isn't good. She's very weak. Lin Shuanghe urged him. I'll clean her wound with hot water first. Her wound is on her waist. Xiaoju thought about the blood on his hand when he helped He Yan up. He took a deep breath and walked to He Yan's side. After washing his hands, he slowly undid He Yan's clothes. He turned his head and looked at the other side. He didn't look at He Yan. Even so, he couldn't avoid touching He Yan's body. The skin under his hand was delicate and smooth. It was completely different from the skin of the men in the military camp. It was also at this moment that he seemed to realize that He Yan was indeed a girl. This person was usually lively and lively. She called the Liangzhou guards brothers. She also had a straightforward personality. She was even better than the men. Over time, even though he knew she was a girl, he still treated her like a man. His mind flashed back to that night when he discovered He Yan's identity as a girl at the county magistrate's manor in Liangzhou City. Yin Qiu had cut up his clothes. At that moment, he realized that the body that usually looked strong and unparalleled was actually covered with such white skin. It was so fragile that it couldn't withstand a single blow. He pulled a thin blanket from the side and wrapped He Yan's upper body in it. He reached out to untie her belt. As soon as he started, he was surprised. He Yan's belt was a bit too tight. Was it because girls like to be beautiful? Looking at this person's usual behavior, it was impossible. He untied the belt and instantly felt his palms become wet. He Yan's mattress was stained red. Lin Shuanghe also stopped joking. He reached out to check and was stunned. He said solemnly, "She has a knife on her body." Xiaoju asked, "What?" Lin Shuanghe took out small golden pliers and silver needles from the box. He used the pliers to gently probe inside. On the mattress, He Yan furrowed her brows. She seemed to be awakened by the pain, but in the end, she didn't wake up. The pliers carefully pulled out a thin blade from the wound on her waist. Xiaoju's eyebrows twitched. Lin Shuanghe said, half ruefully and half admiringly, "This little sister is really strong." Xiaoju looked at the blade that had been thrown into the plate. It was thin and sharp. She always carried this thing on the martial arts stage. When did she get it? Did she stab it when Raida Musi fought with her? Or did she stab it before that? If it was before that, in the previous 2 matches, every time He Yan fought with someone, the blade would pierce deeper. It was as if she was cutting her own flesh. The pain was indescribable. If a normal man couldn't endure it, how could He Yan endure it? Xiaoju still remembered that when she arrived, the young man's face was even smiling. She couldn't tell that there was anything wrong. He had fooled everyone. Liars were used to putting on an act, but if she had to lie to herself, she would be a little pitiful. What's the background of this girl? Lin Shuanghe asked Xiaoju as he cleaned He Yan's wound. The daughter of the gate commandant. The gate commandant? Lin Shuanghe's hands paused. Why is she here? Because of you. You're thinking too much, Xiaoju sneered. To build a career. What? She said it herself. Xiaoju looked out of the window. Lin Shuanghe mulled over her words for a while, but he still couldn't figure out what she meant. He said, "This girl is really amazing. She can endure things that normal people can't. I've been a doctor for so many years and have treated countless women, but this is the first time I've seen someone like her." Lin Shuanghe took out a clean white cloth and bandaged He Yan's wound. His heart was filled with emotions. The number of women he had treated in Shuo City was uncountable, and there were all kinds of strange illnesses. Some thought that the birthmark on their forehead was ugly and asked him to remove it. Some were weak since they were in their mother's womb and asked him to prescribe them to nourish their bodies. Some were married for many years without children and asked him to prescribe them. Some were not favored by their husbands and asked him to create some nourishing recipes to nourish their skin. Those who could afford to hire him were mostly women from wealthy families. They had never suffered in terms of their bodies. Therefore, he was used to seeing the rich and powerful in the world. The scar-ridden dog's tail grass was especially special. "What's your relationship with her?" he asked. Xiao Ju said, "We have no relationship." "If you didn't have a relationship, would you take care of her like this? Even I am being ordered around by you." Lin Shuanghe shook his head and said, "Forget it. What do you plan to do with her in the future? Deal with her. Don't think that just because she's wearing your recruit's uniform, she's really your recruit. I think she's a pretty girl, but look at how she's been tortured. You can't let her stay in your camp as a recruit forever, right? Why don't you send her to Shenmuxue and let her be Shenmuxue's assistant? She can stay by your side and won't have to go to those dangerous places. This girl is weak and delicate. She should be taken care of in the house. You're good. You're ruthless. You're ruthless. Weak?" Xiao Ju was amused by his words. She smiled and said slowly, "Before I rushed back, she had just chopped off the heads of 2 Xichang people." Lin Shuanghe was speechless. "If I came back a little later, she would have chopped off the 3rd one." Lin Shuanghe's hand that was bandaging her wound trembled. After a while, he laughed and said, "Then it's really true that the real person doesn't show off. Ha ha ha." Chapter 114. He Yan's nap was indeed longer than usual. She even had a dream. In the dream, she was fighting with Rida Muji. That commander was brutal and cruel. She pointed a sword at his head, and he suddenly raised his head. It was actually He Rufei's face. The sword in He Yan's hand fell to the ground with a clang. She opened her eyes. Her gaze landed on the soft bed curtains. The mattress beneath her was warm. She lowered her head to look. She was lying on the bed, perfectly fine. He Yan still remembered that before she fainted, she was in the martial arts arena. Xiao Ju and Rida Muji were fighting. In the distance, the reinforcements from the southern prefecture had already arrived. What was the current situation? Was it already over? She propped herself up and slowly sat up. As soon as she moved, she pulled at the wound on her waist. It hurt so much that she couldn't help but furrow her brows. After pausing for a while, she supported herself on the bed and sat up. The wound on her body had already been bandaged. She had returned to her room, the room next to Xiao Ju. There wasn't a single person in the room. She wanted to call someone to ask about the current situation, but she couldn't. Just as she was thinking, the door was pushed open. A young man walked in with medicine. He closed the door and carried the medicine to He Yan's bed. Seeing that He Yan had already sat up, he smiled. "You're awake. Looks like you've recovered well." This was an unfamiliar face. He Yan had seen this person for the first time in the Liang province guards. However, looking at his clothes, he definitely wasn't a new soldier. He Yan stared at his face. Her mind went blank for a moment. Suddenly, she came back to her senses and almost blurted out the other party's name. Fortunately, she reacted in time. The words were at the tip of her tongue, but she forcefully swallowed them back down. That person looked at her with a smile and said, "My name is Lin Shuanghe. I'm a doctor and also Xiao Huijin's friend. I was the one who treated your wound." Seeing that He Yan only stared at him without saying anything, Lin Shuanghe thought for a moment and said, "Don't misunderstand. I didn't take off your clothes. It was Xiao Huijin who did it. I was only responsible for treating your wound." Cough. I also know your true identity. He lowered his voice and leaned closer to He Yan. Little sister, I really admire you. He Yan, she nodded at Lin Shuanghe with difficulty. Thank you. You're welcome. Lin Shuanghe smiled and handed the medicine to her. Drink it. It's almost cold. He Yan took the bowl and drank the medicine slowly. He could not hide the shock in his heart. Lin Shuanghe actually came to the Liang province guard. He Yan was no stranger to Lin Shuanghe. In fact, he was also He Yan's classmate. He Yan felt that she was actually more familiar with Lin Shuanghe than with Xiao Zhu among the youths who went to school together in the Xianchang school. There was no other reason. In fact, it was because he was the one who fought with He Yan for the last place in the academy examinations. 8 out of 10 times, it was him. Yes, Lin Shuanghe looked like he had an intelligent face. In fact, he was terrible at the civil and military examinations. He was different from He Yan. He Yan worked hard but was still the last place. Lin Shuanghe did not work hard at all. He had a good relationship with Xiao Zhu. They were inseparable every day. His homework was copied from his good friend. When the teacher asked him to copy the copybook, he paid someone to help him copy it. The youngsters of the Virtuous Prosperity Mansion were either from wealthy or respectable families. None of them lacked those few coins. However, every time this Lin Shuanghe took out a rare treasure, there would always be people who coveted it. He Yan could not resist the temptation and helped Lin Shuanghe copy books for an entire night and received a jade grasshopper. Lin Shuanghe was extremely rich. The Lin family had been practicing medicine for generations. Their ancestors worked in the Imperial Institute of Medicine in the palace. Now Lin Shuanghe's grandfather, Lin Qingtan, was the head of the Imperial Institute of Medicine. Lin Qingtan's youngest son, Lin Mu, was an imperial physician. He was very outstanding in women's medicine and was deeply loved by the imperial concubines in the palace. Lin Mu also liked to develop secret beauty recipes. He had won the favor of the Empress Dowager, Empress and imperial concubines and was rewarded from time to time. These rewards were given to Lin Shuanghe. Lin Mu only had Lin Shuanghe as a son and doted on him very much. Lin Shuanghe relied on his family's wealth to spend his days in the Xianchang school. The Lin family did not have high expectations for Lin Shuanghe. They had never thought of asking Lin Shuanghe to be outstanding in civil and military matters. They also did not care about his homework as long as he did not throw his face in front of the Lin family. There was no pressure in the Lin family and the only people they had to deal with were the teachers in the Xianchang school. Thus Lin Shuanghe's school life was filled with relaxation and contentment from playing with cats and dogs. The debauchee, Lin Shuanghe, had fallen. Seeing He Yan working so hard, he did not understand. Once when He Yan was busy reciting books, He Yan came over and asked, "Brother He, you are working so hard every day but you are always in the last place. What is the meaning of this?" He Yan ignored him and continued reciting books. Lin Shuanghe was bored and left by himself. After a few days, He Yan went from the last place to the second last place in the academy examinations. He came to find He Yan again and asked, "Brother He, let's make a deal. This time's academy examinations, can you still be in the last place and allow me to be in the second last place?" He Yan. Why? Teacher complained in front of my grandfather and my grandfather scolded my father. My father ordered that I must improve in the next academy examinations, otherwise he will cut off my source of income. Now I am in the last place. As long as you are in the last place, won't I improve? He Yan. Brother He, I beg you. This youth pleaded, "If you help me this time, I will give you the phoenix hairpin bestowed by Imperial concubine Shu." I don't want. He Yan rejected, "I am not a girl, what do I need the hairpin for? You can give it to your mother." Lin Shuanghe waved his fan and continued to negotiate with him, "Or you can tell me what you like and I will give it to you as long as you help me this time." "I'm sorry." He Yan shook his head, I really want to help but I am unable to. Brother Lin, why don't you find Brother Huijin to help you revise your homework? His homework is so good and as long as he gives you a few pointers, you will definitely improve. Lin Shuanghe heard this and rolled his eyes, spare me please. Who wants his pointers? He only cares about sleeping all day and has no patience. If I want his pointers, I would rather study it myself. Saying that, he sighed, how can there be a person in this world who sleeps all day and is still in the first place? He must be a monster. He Yan looked at Xiao Ju who was sleeping on the desk and deeply agreed with Lin Shuanghe's words. The heavens must be Xiao Ju's biological father, that's why he was so fond of him. Lin Shuanghe hung his head dejectedly and looked very pitiful. He Yan looked at him and felt some compassion in his heart. She said to him, actually, you don't have to be discouraged. I have to revise my homework every day. If you don't mind, you can come with me. You can take the homework that I've organized and look at it. It's okay. Saying that, she felt a bit uneasy, however, I'm not very good at organizing it. Lin Shuanghe looked at her. He Yan felt his hair stand on end. The youth closed his fan, okay. What? If I'm going to revise with you, then so be it. I also want to try what it feels like to have a beam hanging over my head. In fact, Lin Shuanghe's popularity in the Xiancheng dojo was much better than He Yan's. He didn't wear a mask and didn't act alone. He was elegant and generous with his money. He didn't put on airs and handled things smoothly. He would often treat everyone to delicious food. Moreover, which youth didn't have a mother or sister? If they had a headache or fever, they would have to beg Imperial Physician Lin to treat them. In addition, his grandfather had a good relationship with the nobles in the palace, so no one dared to offend him. Therefore, Lin Shuanghe was liked by all the youths. However, liking him was one matter and revising his homework was another matter. Logically speaking, if Lin Shuanghe wanted to ask for help, there would be many people who were willing to help. But his foundation was too bad. The youths in the Xiancheng dojo were all gifted and didn't have the patience and time to accompany him to revise from the beginning. After a while, no one was willing to take up this tough task. But He Yan wasn't the same. They were about the same. No one was better than the other. Therefore, before the next academy examinations, He Yan and Lin Shuanghe spent the entire day revising their homework. Lin Shuanghe's martial sciences were not good so he directly gave up. While he was revising with He Yan, he was also revising on the literary subjects. No matter what other people said, they were still decent. In the evening, after school, everyone went to eat. The two of them sat in the classroom, reciting to each other. But this kind of recitation was usually done by Lin Shuanghe who was sitting with a book in his hand while He Yan recited in a cadence. She said, the way of the university is to be virtuous, to be close to the people, to stop at being virtuous. To know when to stop, then to settle, then to be calm, then to be at peace. The ancient desire to be virtuous, first. Reciting to this point, she forgot what she was going to say. He Yan looked at Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe didn't give her a reminder as he ate the dried fruit while deliberately teasing her, first what? He Yan's cheeks turned red as she couldn't remember what she was going to say next. But Lin Shuanghe still urged her, first what? Quickly say it. First down, then up. He Yan randomly made up a story. Cough, 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 someone behind them choked on his tea. The two of them turned around and saw Xiao Ju lazily propping himself up in front of the table in the dark. Huijin, you haven't left yet? Lin Shuanghe was surprised, I thought you left a long time ago. The young man stood up from the table. He probably just woke up and was still a little drowsy. He walked in front of He Yan and Lin Shuanghe and casually asked Lin Shuanghe, what are you doing? I'm revising my homework. Lin Shuanghe put his arm around He Yan's shoulder and said as if they were very familiar with each other, I've decided to improve together with brother He. Revising your homework? He Yan asked. Yes, brother He also gave me the notes that he sorted out. Brother He is really generous, Lin Shuanghe said. Xiao Zhu glanced at He Yan and reached out to pick up the notes on the table. Before He Yan could stop him, he had already flipped through the notes. It was filled with He Yan's private summary of what the teacher had said in class on a daily basis. The one that Xiao Zhu was holding was probably computational classics. He Yan was very tall, so he could only look up at him. The young man casually flipped to a page. His gaze paused and the corners of his mouth twitched. He Yan was a little nervous. After a while, Xiao Zhu put the notes back on the table and said expressionlessly, "There are 5 questions on one page. You got 3 questions wrong." He Yan, huh? Lin Shuanghe was also at a loss. Xiao Zhu glanced at the two of them and curled his lips. His tone was not without sarcasm. "You want to improve together?" Lin Shuanghe, he turned and left. Under the mask, He Yan's face and ears were red. He Yan still clearly remembered the results of the academy examinations. She and Lin Shuanghe were tied at the bottom. She did not know how Lin Shuanghe went back to report. Whether it was considered improvement or not, no one knew. Now that many years had passed, she did not expect to meet Lin Shuanghe again. It was such a scene. Thousands of miles away from the capital, the Liang State Guards was not a classroom filled with the sound of books. It was a battlefield that had just experienced a massacre. They were no longer unlucky classmates revising their homework together. One was a recruit and the other was a doctor. How mysterious was fate. He Yan drank all the medicine in the bowl and put it aside. He looked at the person in front of him. Compared to many years ago, Lin Shuanghe's eyebrows had matured a lot. He had lost some of his youthful immaturity and looked more mature. When he didn't speak, he was an elegant young master. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, his bearing completely collapsed. He moved closer to He Yan and said with a smile, "Little sister, tell me honestly. Did you come to the Liang State Guard for Xiao Huijin?" He Yan, what? You like him? So you chased after him to the Liang State Guards? He said in admiration, "Your courage is commendable." He Yan was silent for a moment and explained, "It's not like that. I met with some things in the capital and could not stay there. I had no other choice so I joined the army." Xiao Zhu and Lin Shuanghe had always had a good relationship. Since Lin Shuanghe knew that she was a woman, Xiao Zhu must have mentioned these things to Lin Shuanghe. "Then how did he find out that you were a woman?" Lin Shuanghe did not believe her. "I think the relationship between you two is not ordinary. He discovered my identity because military governor Xiao is resourceful and suspicious of me. He sent people to the capital to investigate my identity." "Dr. Lin," He Yan said patiently, "can I ask you for a favor?" Lin Shuanghe said seriously, "Please speak. Can you not call me little sister in the Liang State Guards? There are too many people here. If my identity is exposed, it will bring trouble to the governor. Normally, you can just call me Brother He." "Little Brother He, this is a small matter." "Of course I can." Lin Shuanghe looked at her and shook his head with a sigh. "You are a delicate and pretty woman. Why did you come here to suffer instead of staying at home? It makes one's heart ache." He Yan, here it comes again. Speaking of which, Lin Shuanghe really hadn't changed in the slightest when it came to this matter. He was different from Xiao Zhu. When Xiao Zhu was young, the number of girls who adored him could line up from the east to the west of the city. However, he didn't give any of them a second glance. Lin Shuanghe was the other extreme. As long as it was a girl, no. As long as it was a female, no matter if it was a human or an animal, he would return the favor with 120% patience and tenderness. When he called them girls, he didn't call them little sister. It was intimate and tactful, as if he really had so many brothers and sisters in his family. When he was young, there were many girls who tried to get close to Lin Shuanghe using Xiao Zhu. Lin Shuanghe was not as unreasonable as Xiao Zhu. He was friendly and amiable, and he didn't get angry over these things. Instead, he was happy to run errands for them. Today, he would help this little sister deliver a flower letter. Tomorrow, he would help this little sister bring a plate of desserts. He was born with good looks. As time went by, some of the girls who originally wanted to get close to Xiao Zhu had their hearts set on Lin Shuanghe. Of course, Lin Shuanghe was also very principled. No matter if they liked him or not, they were all little sisters. When he was young, he called He Yan brother He in a righteous and awe-inspiring manner. Now that he had changed to a gentle tone and affectionately called him little sister, He Yan really couldn't stand it. He immediately had goosebumps all over his body. You haven't recovered from your old injuries, and now you have new ones. Especially that blade, it's very deep. I've treated it for you, but it won't heal in a day or two. For the next few days, you need to stay in bed and recuperate. You don't have to do anything like daily training. Lin Shuanghe looked at her. As for the scars, you don't have to worry too much. Our Lin family has a good way to remove scars and regenerate skin. Although it won't be able to recover to its original appearance, it can still heal 70 to 80%. It won't be too glaring. He Yan nodded. Thank you, Dr. Lin. You don't have to thank me. Among all the girls I've treated, you're the one with the most serious injuries and the one with the best pain tolerance. You've really opened my eyes. Also, you're Huijin's friend, so you can treat me as a friend in the future. If you have any difficulties, just let me know. At this point, He Yan thought of something and asked, Dr. Lin, is the commander-in-chief here? I have something important to tell him. He's outside. Wait a moment. Lin Shuanghe stood up and opened the door. He said to the people in the courtyard, Xiao Huijin, He Yan is looking for you. Xiao Zhu was talking to Shinhan. When she heard this, she nodded, indicating that she understood. After a while, Shinhan left and walked over. Lin Shuanghe was waiting for him at the door. When he came in, he was about to follow him in. Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at him. Lin Shuanghe was confused. What do you want? Wait outside. Why? Lin Shuanghe asked. Is there something that I can't hear? Xiao Zhu glanced at him and said calmly, it's a military secret. Then, she closed the door in Lin Shuanghe's face. He Yan, alright, if Lin Shuanghe was here, there were indeed some things that were inconvenient for him to know. Even though they were schoolmates, the current situation in the Liang province guard had made even her frightened. Xiao Zhu walked over. He Yan looked up at him. They hadn't seen each other for half a month, but it felt like a long time had passed. He was still as cold and lazy as ever, as if there hadn't been a battle not long ago. His clothes were still as clean as autumn water. He Yan was startled. When he came back to his senses, he said, Commander-in-Chief, Lei Ho is in the dungeon. I know. He sat down on a chair in front of the bed and looked at He Yan. He said carelessly, I've already sent someone to guard him. He Yan sighed in relief. Since he had sent someone to guard him, he wasn't afraid that Lei Ho would kill himself midway. Xiao Zhu should know this better than him. In reality, ever since he had fought with Lei Ho during the battle for the flag, He Yan had vaguely sensed that something was wrong. However, that feeling was very faint, and she couldn't figure it out until she was locked up in the dungeon. He Yan was certain that there was a spy in the Jiangzhou guards who was cooperating with Hu Yuanzhong. After combing through the people he knew, his suspicions once again returned to Lei Ho. Lei Ho was a bit strange. During the battle for the flag, she had fought with Lei Ho. At that time, Lei Ho had used a sword. He Yan remembered very clearly that Lei Ho used his left hand when he used a sword. This wasn't a big deal. Perhaps he was left-handed and was used to using his left hand. However, later on, when Lei Ho entered the Vanguard Battalion, He Yan had also gone to watch the Vanguard Battalion train. At that time, Lei Ho had used a spear with his right hand. If he was left-handed, there was no need for him to deliberately use his right hand, unless he wanted to hide something. He Yen thought about it and felt that when Lei Ho had used a sword during the battle for the flag, it had been a bit awkward. It seemed that he was more used to using a saber. Using a saber to dance with a sword wasn't that natural. That day, the masked man who had led her to the mountain was the same. Later on, when Raidamuzi led his troops, Lei Ho wanted to go to the dungeon to silence him, but He Yen subdued him instead. He Yen also understood that if Lei Ho was related to the Chang people, then if he used a saber, it would most likely be a scimitar. Perhaps he was afraid of being discovered, so he used a sword at first. However, He Yen was sensitive. Lei Ho might have felt that this was not safe, so he simply used his right hand. It would be harder to find traces. However, He Yen still had some doubts. She asked, "Governor, you went to Zhangtai. Did you come back so quickly?" Even if everything went smoothly in Zhangtai, after going back and forth, he wouldn't have come back at this time. Moreover, he had brought back the Nan Fu soldiers. "I didn't go to Zhangtai," Xiao Ju said. He Yen looked at him. "The distress signal from Zhangtai was fake," he said. "I went to Qingnan and brought some of the Nan Fu soldiers over." He Yen was silent. She had already thought of this when she began to suspect Hu Yuanzhong. This was probably a trap to lure Xiao Ju away. When Xiao Ju wasn't there, Raidamuzi would lead the Chang people to fight the Yangzhou Guard recruits. How could the recruits who had only trained for half a year be a match for the Chang people? This battle would be difficult to win. However, Raidamuzi would never have dreamed that Xiao Ju didn't go to Zhangtai at all. He Yen asked, "Then did you deliberately put Lei Ho into the vanguard? You suspected him for a long time?" Xiao Ju curled her lips. "Yes." He Yen was inwardly shocked. In the battle for the flags, she was clearly the one who had taken all 20 flags, but Xiao Ju chose Lei Ho, who had been defeated by her, to go to the vanguard. He Yen couldn't understand it no matter how hard he tried. Now, everything suddenly became clear in front of him. Xiao Ju had probably already suspected Lei Ho's identity as a traitor at that time, and deliberately made such a good show to lure the snake out of its hole. She actually didn't realize. This was a trap. Boo Boo was much earlier than all of them. How could Raidamuzi have known that from the beginning, she had already stepped into the trap and couldn't turn back? "Commander-in-Chief, you are so amazing," He Yen said sincerely. Although they were both generals, Xiao Ju had some skills and he couldn't help but admire her. Xiao Ju looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Not as amazing as you." He Yen, "Me?" He crossed his arms and calmly looked at He Yen. "Are you done asking? If you are, then it's my turn." These words were so strange that He Yen didn't understand. He only asked, "What do you mean?" He laughed and took out something from his chest and threw it in front of He Yen. He Yen paused and picked it up to take a look. It was a piece of paper that had been folded in half. On it was a rough map and words. Upon closer inspection, it was the map and words of the Yangzhou Guard. That night when she was locked up in the dungeon, Song Tao Tao came to visit her. He Yen asked her to help him with something. It was to hand this matter over to Shinhan. At that time, He Yen didn't know what Shinhan would do if he saw this, but the situation was critical and he didn't have time to think about it. He Yen was prepared for the worst. If she really couldn't get out, or if she couldn't stop the situation from developing, this piece of paper would be her final trump card. Now, the trump card was in Xiao Ju's hands. "Lady he tilted his head and looked at He Yen with a smile that wasn't a smile. His voice was faint. "Explain." Chapter 115. Explain. How could she explain this? At the time, the situation was critical. He Yen was locked up in the dungeon. She guessed that at this time, the enemy would most likely make a move. She asked Song Tao Tao to find a pen and paper and wrote a letter to Shin Han. The letter had a map of the Liang province guard drawn on it. He Yan had been there for half a year, so the map was drawn in detail. She guessed that the enemy would cross the Wulu River. She suggested that Shin Han send hundreds to 1,000 archers to hide in the Wulu River and head toward the Liang province guard station in the depths of the forest. Once the enemy crossed the river and came to the Liang province guard station, they would fall into an ambush. At the time, I was framed for murder and sent to the dungeon. He Yan thought for a moment, then explained, although the others didn't believe me, I felt that the enemy was after something big. Governor, you weren't there. If something really happened, the Liang province guard would be in danger. So I drew this map and asked Miss Song to give it to Shin Jiaodo. However, at the time, I wasn't sure if Shin Jiaodo would do as I said. I was just treating a dead horse like a living one. Although Shin Han didn't believe him, he was still cautious when it came to the Liang province guard. He had people hide in the depths of the forest as He Yan said. That was why Rida Muzi's troops fell into an ambush when they came to the training field. They were already at a disadvantage by the shore, and their morale was low. Xiao Ju looked up. Why the shore? The small enemy is trapped. To catch a thief, the door must be closed. It's not that I'm afraid it'll be easy, I'm afraid it'll be easy for others to get it. He laughed. You've learned the art of war quite well. What's with the granary? Behind the Liang province guard station is White Moon Mountain, next to the Wulu River. This path is the way out for you, Governor. Further ahead is the path to enter the city. I guessed that the enemy was after something big, and the Liang province guard station might not be enough. If we were brought into the enemy's position, the first thing we would do would be to burn the granary. Without supplies, the Liang province guard recruits wouldn't be able to last long. They could either be trapped here or enter the city. Once the city gates were opened and the enemy troops entered the city, Liangzhou's city would fall. That's why I told Shin Jiaodo in the letter that I ordered people to hide in the dark and guard the granary to prevent anyone from setting fire to it. In fact, Rida Muzi had indeed sent people to set the place on fire, but they were taken down by the Liangzhou recruits who were already prepared. Your guess is very accurate. Xiao Ju said slowly. She leaned forward and stared into her eyes. You've planned everything out, young lady. His eyes were deep and serene, as clear as autumn waters. He Yan felt a little uncomfortable looking at them. She didn't know how to respond. Why was she able to come up with such a flawless plan? It was because she had experienced the Chang people's act of burning granaries countless times. As long as they could confirm that the other party was from the Chang, they would naturally know what they would do next. But she couldn't say that to Xiao Ju. You seem to know a lot. Did your father teach you the art of war at home? He asked with a smile. He Yan knew that this person was already suspicious, so she simply made up a story. No, I didn't. I learned it all myself. Doesn't the commander-in-chief think that I'm a natural talent? He laughed coldly. Liar, you're lying again, aren't you? The commander-in-chief always suspects that I'm a liar. You should at least show evidence. He Yan became a little bolder. You suspected Lei Ho, so you put Lei Ho into the vanguard battalion. Finally, Lei Ho gave himself away. You suspected that there was something wrong with me, so you put me by your side. I'm only separated from the commander-in-chief's room by a wall. Logically speaking, if there was something wrong with me, it would be easier for the commander-in-chief to find out. But until now, other than the fact that I'm a woman, nothing else has happened. The commander-in-chief's words are a little unreasonable. Xiao Ju was so angry that he laughed. I'm unreasonable. The commander-in-chief has kept me by your side for so long. Other than my loyalty, alertness, bravery, and wisdom, what else have you discovered? Nothing at all. He Yan spread out his hands. As a general, you should be fair in your rewards and punishments. This time, I can be considered to have solved the crisis of the Liang province guards and made a contribution. Shouldn't the commander-in-chief reward me? Reward? He asked slowly, what kind of reward do you want? He Yen sat up straighter and leaned closer to him. His eyes lit up as he stared at him. Can I go to the 9 Flags Battalion? No. He Yen asked, why? The 9 Flags Battalion doesn't accept liars who are full of lies, he answered indifferently. I'm not lying. Lady He. He stared at her with his beautiful eyes and suddenly curved his lips. Although I don't know what you're hiding, he paused, then said, one day, your secret will be revealed. He Yan's heart skipped a beat and he forgot to answer. He stood up and walked out. He Yan hurriedly said, then what about Hu Yuanzhong? Xiao Ju didn't stop walking. He's dead, she said, then walked out the door. He Yan was stunned. He's dead. When Xiao Ju went out, Lin Shuanghe was already gone. Only Fei Nu was standing guard outside. Xiao Ju asked, where did Lin Shuanghe go? Dr. Lin said he was going to Lady Shin's place to help make some medicine, Fei Nu answered. The new recruits who died in the Liang province guards have already been settled. The new recruits who died in battle would be buried at the foot of Mount Baiyue. These young lives didn't even have time to experience a real battle before they were slaughtered under a knife in the dark. Xiao Ju pinched the space between her brows. After receiving the news from Zhang Tai, he immediately set out for Zhang Tai. However, halfway through his journey, he felt that something was wrong. He secretly contacted the commander of the 9 Flags Battalion and learned that Zhang Tai was indeed being harassed by the Yudo. However, it wasn't as serious as the letter said. Halfway through, he turned his horse around and sent a portion of the Nanfu soldiers stationed in Qingnan over. The other party must be coming for the Liang province guards, or in other words, coming for him. Right now, he had just taken over the Liang province guards. If something happened to the Liang province guards in Xiao Ju's hands, the emperor would have a valid reason to take back his military power. The ministers in the court who were dissatisfied with him could hit him when he was down. He wouldn't be able to be the commander for long. Those Western Chang people, they're not Western Chang people, Xiao Ju interrupted Fei Nu, they're Yuto. Fei Nu was stunned. Other than Raida Musi and his trusted aides who are Chang people, the others are all Yuto. Fei Nu asked, they're using someone else to kill them? They're trying to kill me, he chuckled and turned around. Tell Shen Han and all the other instructors to come to my room. He Yan rested for a while after Xiao Ju left. Song Tao Tao, Qing Li Su, and Shin Muxue arrived. The 2 children each carried a large basket of food. Because the Chang people had just come, the Liang province guards were on high alert and couldn't enter the city. Therefore, there wasn't any good food like the restaurants. However, there was still fish soup and steamed meat. Song Tao Tao ran to He Yan's bed and asked him, are you feeling better? Not bad, He Yan smiled and said, thank you for asking Shin Jiado for help. The little girl showed a rare shyness. After a while, she said, it's nothing. You were in prison at the time. Also, you saved me, so we're even. When did my big brother save you? Qing Lisu still didn't know that Song Tao Tao had been kidnapped by Sun Ling in Liang province and asked suspiciously. This is a secret. Why should I tell you? Song Tao Tao didn't treat Qing Lisu well. That's my big brother. Of course, I have the right to know. Why should you hide it from me? Seeing that the 2 were about to quarrel again, Shin Muxue shook her head helplessly and said to He Yan, little brother He, I wronged you before. She was talking about Hu Yuanzhong. It's okay, He Yan said, they even hid it from the instructors. It's normal for them to hide it from you. Also, Miss Shin was in a hurry to save him and didn't think too much. Oh right, she thought of something. I heard from military governor Xiao that Hu Yuanzhong is dead. Shin Muxue nodded. That Hu Yuanzhong wanted to kidnap me when Raida Musi appeared. Later, when the commander-in-chief rushed back, the commander-in-chief's guards fought with him. This person died in the hands of the guards. If you knew he was going to die, you wouldn't have bothered to save him and waste medicinal herbs, Qing Lisu muttered. He Yan thought that Hu Yuanzhong really liked Shen Mushua's beauty and didn't give up on his evil intentions. When the two armies were fighting, he actually wanted to take advantage of the chaos to kidnap her. His intentions were worthy of death. Little brother Shen Mushua looked at her and asked seriously, I don't understand. Why did you suspect that there was something wrong with Hu Yuanzhong at that time? And every suspicion was accurate. After all, at that time, Hu Yuanzhong was well behaved in the Liang province guards. Even though Xiao Mai and the others received He Yan's orders to keep an eye on Hu Yuanzhong every day, they didn't see anything wrong with him. He Yan couldn't say that it was because of the rash on Hu Yuanzhong's hand. It showed that she was very familiar with the Chang people. After a moment of silence, she said, it's the paper with the love poem. Paper? Shen Mushua was stunned. The relic that Hu Yuanzhong's deceased wife left for him. That's right. He Yan said, you were all moved by his deep feelings, but such a person would never look at you with that kind of gaze. What kind of gaze? Shen Mushua was puzzled. He Yan scratched her head. It's the kind of gaze that a man has for a woman. She thought that Shen Mushua was a girl after all. She was thin-skinned. If she said that she was drooling, it would inevitably make her feel embarrassed. It was better to say it tactfully. But this Miss Shen wasn't an ordinary girl. When she heard this, she didn't feel embarrassed. She just asked curiously, how did you know? Me? This question was a bit difficult for He Yan. She said, I've been paying attention to Miss Shen. Shen Mushua frowned. Song Tao Tao saw that the situation wasn't good. She hurriedly stepped forward to block He Yan's gaze from Shen Mushua. She nonchalantly picked up the cup beside her and handed it to He Yan. Big brother He, drink some water. He Yan. Thank you. As they were talking, they heard someone's laughter outside. When they turned around, they saw that Lin Shuanghe had returned. He fanned himself in the middle of winter and walked over gracefully. He had a gentle smile on his face. I was wondering why it was so lively. It turns out that everyone is here. Uncle Lin, Qing Lisu shouted. Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Zhu were about the same age. Qing Lisu and Lin Shuanghe were about the same age. But because she called Xiao Zhu uncle, she followed suit and called Lin Shuanghe uncle. However, Lin Shuanghe probably wasn't satisfied with this form of address. His smile faltered and wasn't as smooth as before. Shen Mushua stood up. Young Master Lin. Miss Shen, I just came back from the medical center. A few recruits woke up and were complaining that their wounds hurt. Do you want to take a look? Shen Mushua was stunned. Is that so? Then she looked at He Yan. Little brother He, I'll go to the medical center to take a look. Do you feel any discomfort? No, no. Before He Yan could reply, Song Tao Tao spoke first. She looked at Shen Mushua as if she was facing a great enemy. If there's anything wrong, young Master Lin is here. He will treat it. Doesn't Uncle Lin only treat women? Qing Lisu asked curiously. Ahem. Lin Shuanghe closed his fan. Occasionally, I can make an exception. If that's the case, I'll leave first. Shen Mushua bowed to everyone and turned to leave the room. Song Tao Tao heaved a sigh of relief. He Yan, she had a headache and didn't know what to do. Lin Shuanghe was a smart person. He could tell that she was in a difficult position. He said to Song Tao Tao and Qing Lisu, I'm going to take a look at your big brother He's wounds. After that, he needs to rest. It's best if you two don't disturb him. Resting again? Qing Lisu asked, we just met him, and it hasn't even been a cup of tea's time. I still have something to say to big brother He. That can only be said after your big brother He recovers. Lin Shuanghe held his shoulder and pushed him towards the door. Don't tell me you want to watch him lie in bed and never recover. Song Tao Tao turned to look at He Yan. He Yan pretended to be powerless and held his forehead. She bit her lip and pulled Qing Lisu out. Since that's the case, let's not disturb him. Let him rest more. We'll come again tomorrow. Qing Lisu said, if you want to talk, just talk. Why are you pulling me? Song Tao Tao, do you think I want to touch you? The two children left noisily. Lin Shuanghe closed the door. He Yan sighed. Lin Shuanghe was really good. After so many years, his ability to read people's body language was still top-notch. No wonder he was so popular in the Xianchang dojo. He Yan couldn't help but feel grateful to him for being able to think of what others were thinking. Little sister, you're really amazing. Lin Shuanghe waved his fan and walked over with a smile. You're already like this, but you can still make girls fight over you. Amazing. He Yan said weakly, you flatter me. She wasn't an idiot. Of course, she understood Song Tao Tao's thoughts. However, a little girl's thoughts were ever-changing. She would probably be fine after a while. Dr. Lin, did you come to find me for something? Nothing. Lin Shuanghe sighed. There's still blood everywhere in the Liang province guards. The corpses of the Chang people are piling up. My head hurts just looking at them. Although I'm a doctor, I don't like to see blood. I'm very annoyed, so I came to your place to hide. Lin Shuanghe was also a pampered young master. He probably wasn't used to the bitter cold of the Liang province guards. She borrowed Qing Li's room. It was spacious and comfortable. Perhaps it was because she was injured, but there was a charcoal fire. It was very warm. In comparison, it was more suitable to laze around than outside. Why don't you go find Military Governor Shao? He Yan asked. His room is much more comfortable than mine. I want to go too. Lin Shuanghe shrugged. I bumped into him when I came over. He brought some people to the dungeon. Maybe something happened. I'll go find him when he comes back. The dungeon? He Yan was stunned. What? You want to go? Lei Ho was the only one in the dungeon. Xiao Ju probably went to the dungeon to interrogate Lei Ho. She had fought with Lei Ho before, so she might be able to help. He Yan said, I want to go. Can young Master Lin help? Originally, I couldn't. Lin Shuanghe waved his fan reservedly. But since it's a request from a beautiful girl, it's fine. He stood up. Let's go. I'll get you a stick to support you. At the entrance of the dungeon, Xiao Ju, Shen Han, and the others were walking in. The number of guards at the entrance had doubled. There were also people watching from inside. They were afraid that Lei Ho would commit suicide in the dungeon. The wind lifted Xiao Ju's clothes. He asked as he walked, where's Du Mao? He's been locked up as per your orders. Shen Han wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he said, but regarding Lei Ho's matter, he might not know. With me, there's no possibility. Rules are rules. The young man's expression was indifferent. If you're wrong, you have to be punished. Shen Han didn't dare to say anything. When the guards in the dungeon saw Xiao Ju, they made way for him. Xiao Ju took off his cloak and handed it to Fei Nu. Then, he looked at the people in the dungeon. When He Yan fought with Lei Ho, he fed Lei Ho knockout pills and tied him up with Song Tao Tao's belt. As a result, when Xiao Ju's men arrived, Lei Ho had yet to wake up. But now, Lei Ho was in a much worse state than Lei Ho when he fought with He Yan. His hands and feet were all bound by wooden shackles. He couldn't move. Even his neck couldn't move. He didn't have any strength left. He couldn't bite his tongue to commit suicide. Once he lost the chance to control his own life, he was like a fish on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Open the door, Xiao Ju said. The guard stood up and opened the door. Even though the door was opened, Lei Ho could only move his mouth. His entire body couldn't move. He looked at the person in front of him. The young man's eyebrows and eyes were unbelievably beautiful under the light. But his gaze was as cold as ice. Don't waste your energy, Lei Ho squeezed out a smile, I won't say anything. The guard moved a chair over and Xiao Ju sat down. He looked down at Lei Ho. His voice was calm. A few months ago, during the battle for the flag on White Moon Mountain, you lost to He Yen. But I still chose you to enter the vanguard. Do you know why? Lei Ho's smile froze. He stared at Xiao Ju in disbelief. Xiao Ju raised his eyebrows, you guessed it. You did it on purpose. Lei Ho's voice was hoarse. A recruit who didn't make a sound during the day training. But during the battle for the flag, he shocked the world. What are you, a genius? Xiao Ju mocked, are you that kind of genius? Lei Ho was speechless. He had schemed and racked his brains to enter the Liang State Guards. He had thought of every possible way to enter step by step. He was afraid that he would be exposed. Even at this point, he still had the fearlessness to sacrifice himself. But Xiao Ju's words had destroyed his defenses. He had known from the beginning. So everything he did was like a clown. He was led by the nose, but he was still pleased with himself. So what? Lei Ho forced himself to say, since I'm going to die anyway, I might as well die with some value. Even if it adds a thorn in your heart, it's fine. When I chose you to enter the vanguard, you did something. Xiao Ju casually waved his hand. Fei Nu bent down and took out something from his bosom. He handed it to Xiao Ju. It was a fragrant sachet and a longevity lock. Xiao Ju threw the fragrant sachet in front of Lei Ho. He twirled the longevity lock around his finger and looked at Lei Ho with a smile that was not a smile. Look, do you recognize it? Lei Ho felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The embroidery on the fragrant sachet was very familiar. It was the work of his wife. Lei Ho had personally ordered a craftsman to make the longevity lock for his son to wear. Xiao Huijin, he gritted his teeth and said, you shouldn't implicate your wife and children, wife and children. Xiao Ju played with the longevity lock in his hand and mocked, when you came to do this, did you still remember that you had a wife and children? Lei Ho gritted his teeth and didn't speak. By doing this, you are tying the lives of your wife and children to your body. If you succeed, you will live together. If you fail, why do you think that you will be the only one who will pay the price? Xiao Huijin. Lei Ho shouted. He wanted to struggle, but he was restrained by the wooden shackles and couldn't do anything. At this moment, his eyes were red and he shouted, what are you trying to do? The young governor looked at him and revealed a mocking smile, you can tell me everything you know. Impossible. Lei Ho said. What a loyal dog. Xiao Ju placed the longevity lock in front of his eyes and observed it carefully. He said indifferently, take a guess. If you die, and your wife and children die, do you think the master you serve will avenge you? I was the only one who did it. Lei Ho begged desperately, they don't know anything. Please let them go. Please let them go. It doesn't matter how you want to punish me. It doesn't matter even if you kill me. I beg you. Before you came, you should have thought about the consequences. Xiao Ju said, as a death warrior, how can you rely on luck? Or, you should have hidden them deeper. Lei Ho fell to the ground. De Wei's young killer had a heart as hard as iron. No matter how much he begged, it was impossible for him to soften his heart. He was an emotionless monster. He was cruel and merciless, like a clay sculpture. If he treated his mother and father like this, how could he be expected to have feelings? What do you want? He asked weakly. But he knew that he couldn't be as cruel as Xiao Ju. He couldn't ignore the lives of his wife and children. But if he told him, his master would also take revenge. This was a path of no return. If he succeeded, he would live. If he failed, he would die. At this moment, Lei Ho regretted it. I said, tell me everything you know. Xiao Zhu said slowly, I have a lot of time. Don't worry. You can tell me everything one by one. What if I don't tell you? The young man stopped fiddling with the longevity lock. In the next moment, the longevity lock in his hand broke into pieces with a slight creak. He actually crushed the longevity lock with his bare hands. You can try. His tone was calm, even gentle. He said, I promise, the next time I send you, it won't just be these two dead objects. Lei Ho closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his expression was one of misery. He looked at Xiao Zhu and sneered, as expected of General Feng Yun, as expected of the Right Army's commander-in-chief. I, Lei Ho, have experienced your temperament and methods. He Yan was walking to and from the dungeon with Lin Shuanghe. When he reached the door, he heard this sentence. No wonder Xiao Zhongwu and his wife fought for military power before the 7th day of their death. No wonder they didn't even bat an eyelid when 60,000 people were drowned in the Battle of Guo City. In terms of ruthlessness, Hu and Dewei can compare to Xiao Huaijin. Chapter 116. No wonder Xiao Zhongwu and his wife fought for military power before the 7th day of their death. No wonder they didn't even bat an eyelid when 60,000 people were drowned in the Battle of Guo Valley. In terms of ruthlessness, Hu and Dewei can compare to Xiao Huaijin. The dungeon was silent for a moment. Shen Han wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The young man's back was facing the prisoner, and his hands slowly clenched into fists by his side. But after a moment, they slowly relaxed. He turned around and looked at Lei Ho. He smiled indifferently and said, it seems that you know what kind of person I am. Then you should think about it more clearly. He walked out, his voice cold. I never give people a second chance. When he reached the door, he happened to see He Yan and Lin Shuanghe standing in the corner. He paused for a moment, then ignored them and left. No one dared to chase after him. Shen Han ordered people to lock Lei Ho back in. It was unknown whether it was the conversation with Xiao Zhu that made Lei Ho despair or something else, but Lei Ho laughed bitterly. His laughter echoed in the dungeon, eerie and mournful. Fei Nu walked out. When he saw He Yan and Lin Shuanghe, he was startled and said, Young Master Lin, why are you here? I wanted to say, He Yan looked inside, I have fought with Lei Ho before. When the governor interrogates Lei Ho, I might be able to help, so I came to take a look. No need, it's already been solved, Fei Nu replied quickly. You can go back now. Lin Shuanghe shrugged. When he saw Xiao Zhu's cloak in Fei Nu's hands, he took the initiative to take it and said, this is Huaijin's clothes. I'll send it to him. I don't think he wants to see anyone right now. Fei Nu said, no need to trouble young Master Lin. It's no trouble at all. Lin Shuanghe said, I was just about to look for him later. Fei Nu stopped and nodded to Lin Shuanghe, thank you, young Master Lin. Lin Shuanghe smiled and said to He Yan, let's go. The two of them walked out together. When they came out, it was already snowing lightly. Now, the snow was even heavier. He Yan was injured, so he walked very slowly. He was still wearing Cheng Lisu's cloak. Although Lin Shuanghe called He Yan little sister intimately, he had a sense of propriety when it came to interacting with women. It was as if he was deliberately avoiding arousing suspicion. He didn't even lend his arm to help him up. However, the two of them were not in a hurry, so they walked very slowly. The snowflakes rustled down and hit them. He Yan thought about what Lei Ho had said in the dungeon. While he was deep in thought, Lin Shuanghe suddenly asked, have you heard of the Battle of Guo City's Long Valley? He Yan was startled, but he immediately replied, I have. The Battle of Guo City's Long Valley was the most important battle when Xiao Zhu led the Nan Fu army to quell the chaos of the southern barbarians after Xiao Zhongwu's death. At that time, everyone in Dawei was waiting to see Xiao Zhu make a fool of himself. A 16-year-old boy leading so many soldiers against a foreign army that even his father couldn't defeat. No matter how they looked at it, he was bound to lose. Who would have thought that he would win the first battle? Later on, the southern barbarians were forced to retreat. Xiao Zhu only took half a year to quell the chaos of the southern barbarians. Do you know how he won the Battle of the Long Valley? Water attack. You know. He Yan didn't say anything. Instead, he poked a small hole in the snow with his bamboo stick. Then you also know that during the Battle of the Long Valley, General Feng Yun and Xiao Huaijin flooded Guo City and 60,000 people died. Lin Shuanghe hugged Xiao Zhu's black cloak tighter. At that time, corpses were floating in the air, and the east of the city stank. Guo City was like hell on earth. It was unbearable. He smiled and asked, "What do you think? Do you think he's cruel and inhumane?" He Yan said calmly, "War is cruel. Being kind to the enemy is being cruel to the people of your own country. Moreover, no one knows the truth before being in that position. If he wasn't cruel and inhumane, we might be the ones drowning now." Lin Shuanghe paused and turned to He Yan. "Why do you think so?" "I just think that military governor Xiao isn't that kind of person." Lin Shuanghe stared at He Yan as if it was the first time he had seen her. He Yan asked, "Is there anything wrong with what I said?" After a while, he shook his head and smiled. "I'm just surprised that you trusted Huaijin so much after spending less than a year with him. Why was I not as firm as you when I first heard about this?" He Yan thought that it was because Lin Shuanghe had never been to a real battlefield. Only those who had seen fighting on the battlefield would know how difficult it was for a general to make a decision. Xiao Zhu was smart and calm. If he didn't have a reason to do so, he wouldn't have done so. Instead, he would have left a bad name for himself. After the Battle of the Long Valley, although Xiao Zhu defeated the southern barbarians and was respected by many young people, he was also criticized by many scholars for being heartless and killing too many people. After all, there were also southern barbarians among the people who drowned in the Battle of the Long Valley. "Dr. Lin, you seem to know why he did this." He Yan asked, "Why?" "I didn't know it from the start." Lin Shuanghe sighed. "Tell me, what other way would he use 3,000 soldiers to fight 60,000 people other than a water attack?" 3,000 soldiers? He Yan suddenly looked up. "Isn't it 100,000 Southern House soldiers?" 100,000? Lin Shuanghe smiled. If he had 100,000 Southern House soldiers, he wouldn't have to use this method. When Xiao Zhongwu died, Madame Xiao followed him. For a time, the Xiao mansion was filled with cries and sorrowful cries. At that time, everyone knew that Xiao Zhongwu's defeat at the Battle of the Ming River was because he was stubborn and self-opinionated. He made mistakes in his command and caused tens of thousands of Dawei soldiers to die on the battlefield. His Majesty was merciful. He remembered Xiao family's many years of contributions and did not pursue Xiao Zhongwu's fault. At the same time, he took back military power. At that time, Xiao Zhu was only 16 years old and Xiao Jing had just turned 18. Bai Rongwei had married into the family for less than half a year before this disaster happened. For a time, everyone was in a state of panic and did not know what to do in the future. Lin Shuanghe still remembered the first time he saw Xiao Zhu after the Xiao family's disaster. The young man was used to having a cold and lazy appearance, as if nothing was on his mind. But he also taught people that there was nothing in the world that could stop him. It was just that if anyone's family suffered such a disaster, they would not be able to recover from it. Even if they were not able to recover, they would still be very different from before. But the Xiao Zhu that Lin Shuanghe saw was not like that. Other than looking a little more haggard than before, he did not look dispirited or depressed. "Do you have medicine that makes people sleep for a whole day?" Xiao Zhu asked. Lin Shuanghe said, "My family's medicine shop has it. If you want it, I can get it for you immediately." The Lin family's medicine shops were all over the Dawei. Just in the downtown area of Shuajing, there were a few shops. Lin Shuanghe ordered a servant to go to the nearest medicine shop and get 2 sets of medicine. He handed them to Xiao Ju and said, "Take it and you will sleep for 20 hours. He suddenly thought of something and said, "If you can't sleep at night, I can make a milder medicine for you." Perhaps Xiao Ju was unable to sleep because of the sudden disaster in his family and wanted to ask for medicine to help him sleep. Xiao Ju put the medicine back into his sleeve and waved his hand at him, saying, "Thank you." He turned and was about to leave. "Huaijin." Lin Shuanghe called out to him. Xiao Ju stopped and looked at him. "This medicine is for you, right?" The young man's eyes were exquisite and bright. He looked past him and into the distance. At the end of the distance, the lofty palace was faintly discernible. He said calmly, "I want to enter the palace." Lin Shuanghe was not stupid. He immediately understood Xiao Ju's intention. He said in horror, "You want to enter the palace without telling your brother?" "Why would I tell him?" The young man lowered his head and smiled, "It will only make him more worried." "You're crazy," Lin Shuanghe said anxiously. "Do you know that the court is in chaos because of General Xiao? No one dares to speak for General Xiao. Prime Minister Su has been accompanying His Majesty every day. Do you know why?" "I know." Xiao Ju said, "So what? The military power must be returned to the Xiao family. You might lose your life if you do this." Xiao Ju turned his head and stared at him. "Then I will lose my life." "You?" "That's right, there's something I need your help with," he said. The young man's face rarely showed such a serious expression. Lin Shuanghe's heart was filled with an ominous premonition. He pursed his lips and asked, "What is it?" "If I come back alive, then pretend that this never happened. If I die," he paused, "there's no need to collect my corpse. Imperial physician Lin has some influence in front of the Empress Dowager. Please help my brother. This has nothing to do with him." "What do you mean, you die?" Lin Shuanghe heard his own trembling voice. "It's very simple. After tonight, if I don't die today, then he will die tomorrow." His expression was calm, as if he was talking about someone else. "But I'm not sure of the result. So," he curved his lips, "you can pray." "Xiao Huaijin." The young man bowed deeply to him. When he straightened up, he only said 2 words. "Thank you." Lin Shuanghe's eyes reddened. Xiao Ju waved his hand at him, "Go back." Lin Shuanghe didn't move. He laughed and turned to leave. That was a long time ago, but Xiao Ju's back seemed to stop in front of him. On the bustling streets of the city, the young man's back was tall and straight, but he looked especially lonely. No one knew what kind of path he would take, but Lin Shuanghe was very clear about one thing. Xiao Ju wouldn't turn back. He Yan's words interrupted him while he was deep in thought. He Yan asked, "So later, the governor entered the palace by himself?" Lin Shuanghe came back to his senses and continued to walk forward slowly. As he walked, he said, "I didn't follow him into the palace. I heard about what happened later from my grandfather." That night, it began to rain. The autumn rain was cold, as if it wanted to soak into people's hearts. In a few days, it would be the Mid-Autumn Festival. If nothing had happened to Xiao Zhongwu, the Xiao family would be busy preparing for the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet. But now, it was bleak and mourning was everywhere. The 3 people at the table were silent. No one wanted to touch the food. Bai Rongwei said warmly, "Eat a little. If you continue like this, your body won't be able to take it." It was all simple porridge and side dishes. After a moment of silence, Xiao Jing picked up the bowl. He took a sip and put it down. "Huaijin, tomorrow morning, I will go to the palace with you." Xiao Ju, "Okay." Bai Rongwei asked, "Go to the palace, for what?" "Xiao family has lost their military power." Sooner or later, they will become meat on the chopping board, at the mercy of others. Xiao Jing said, no matter what, the South Mansion soldiers must be returned to the Xiao family. Otherwise, the Xiao family didn't know how long it would last. Then, even if His Majesty returns the military power to us, what will we do in the future? Bai Rongwei said carefully, Ruby, you are the imperial physician. Even if Huijin joined the military, he is only 16 years old. Xiao Jing's movements stopped. He had to admit that there was no one in the Xiao family. Even if Xiao Ju was talented, he was only 16 years old. He was still a child. How could he lead tens of thousands of soldiers? It would be difficult to convince the public. There are many things a 16-year-old can do. Xiao Ju carelessly picked up food. Big brother, if you are afraid of everything, you will achieve nothing. Xiao Jing sighed, forget it. Let's take one step at a time. Now, there is no other way. Will His Majesty return the military power to us? Bai Rongwei said worriedly, now that Prime Minister Su's power is overwhelming, he will not let go of this opportunity to deal with the Xiao family. He will. The youth lazily poured tea for them, don't be afraid. Su Jingfu is only a mortal. No one spoke again. The night rain continued to fall. The servants helped Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing back to their beds. Xiao Ju stood up, put on his outer clothes, and walked out the door. Outside, Fei Nu was waiting. The rain fell on the ground, creating puddles and ripples. The white lanterns hanging at the door were completely soaked. Xiao Ju stopped at the door. Fei Nu said, young master. He bowed his head and ordered the housekeeper, take care of them. Let's go. They disappeared into the night. The carriage drove to the palace. In the palace, the current Prime Minister Su Jingfu was playing chess with the Emperor Wenshuan. A servant came to report, Your Majesty, the second son of General Guangwu's residence requests an audience. Emperor Wenshuan stopped playing chess, Xiao Huijin. What is he doing here? Probably because of his father. Su Jingfu laughed, Your Majesty, be careful. He picked up a black stone. You, don't play tricks while I'm distracted. Emperor Wenshuan laughed and scolded, sly. Su Jingfu also laughed, Your Majesty is letting me win. The two of them continued to chat and play chess. They seemed to have forgotten about Xiao Ju. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the servant came in again to remind, Your Majesty, second son Xiao is still waiting outside the palace. It's still raining outside. If it's raining, then go back. Emperor Wenshuan was worried about the chess game in front of him, what's he waiting for? Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Su Jingfu said, second son Zhao's family has undergone a great change. He's still a child. He must be feeling wronged. Why don't you let me go out and persuade him? It's best if I can persuade him to go back. Go. Emperor Wenshuan waved his hand impatiently, attending court is Xiao Zhongwu's business, but he can't leave court. Xiao family, I'm tired of hearing it. Let him go back. Go quickly and come back quickly. When you come back, you still have to play this game with me. Su Jingfu stood up and bowed respectfully, yes. When he walked out of the palace, he saw Xiao Ju kneeling at the door. Su Jingfu was over 60 years old. When he was young, he worked in the Hanlin Academy and had students all over the world. De Wei's outstanding young man was more or less related to him. Even though Xiao Ju was not his student, he had heard of Xiao Ju's outstanding performance. He had seen Xiao Ju once during the imperial hunt. He also remembered that the white-robed young man's beauty was captivating. He was like a dazzling pearl, and everyone else paled in comparison. Su Jingfu had also sighed in his heart. It would be great if such an outstanding young man was part of the Su family. Unfortunately, Xiao Zhongwu, that barbarian, took advantage of him. He stood in front of Xiao Ju and said, second son Xiao. The young man raised his head and looked at him. Official Su. It's raining so heavily outside. Why is second son Xiao waiting outside without an umbrella? He ordered the left and right palace servants, come, bring second son Xiao an umbrella. The palace servants held umbrellas and stood behind Xiao Ju. Su Jingfu made a gesture to help him up, as if he was an elder concerned about the younger generation. He said, why are you still kneeling? Hurry and get up. Xiao Ju did not move and said, I want to see His Majesty. His Majesty is busy right now. If second son Xiao really has something to say, you can come back tomorrow. It's already very late. His Majesty still needs to rest after finishing his work. It's not a good time to see His Majesty. The young man did not move and only repeated, Official Su, I must see His Majesty today. Su Jingfu took 2 steps back and looked at him with his hands in his sleeves. He also had a benevolent smile on his face. Second son Xiao, His Majesty is benevolent. Xiao family used to do meritorious deeds and favored you greatly. Now that your father failed in his duty and caused the Dewei soldiers to suffer a crushing defeat at the Battle of Mingshui, he should have pursued this matter. It was His Majesty who gave him a way out on account of their past relationship. How can you be so insatiable and not know what's good for you? The night rain drifted in from below the umbrella and soaked the young man's clothes. His eyebrows were extremely handsome and his expression was calm. His voice was no longer lazy and dissolute as he said, Official Su is right. Su Jingfu's smile did not change. So, Xiao Ju raised his head and looked at him, I implore Official Su to make an exception for His Majesty. Xiao Ju wishes to see His Majesty. Second son Xiao must be joking. Why should I make an exception for His Majesty? Su Jingfu asked. The young man looked at him and lowered his head slightly, please grant my wish, Official Su. A young man's pride was the most fragile. Sometimes, his spine would bend slightly and he would not be able to stand up again. If Xiao Zhongwu knew in the underworld and saw his second son, whom he was so proud of, kneeling in front of him and begging for his mercy, what kind of expression would he have? In an instant, Su Jingfu did not want to immediately force him into a dead end. It was much more interesting to see a proud person fall into the mortal world, be trampled into the mud, and have his pride trampled until it was worthless. He raised his head slightly and said in distress, Second son Xiao, it's not that I don't want to help you. It's just that His Majesty is angry at the Xiao family right now. Even I can't interfere in this matter. Xiao Ju only said, please grant my wish, Official Su. Su Jingfu stared at him. After a while, he said, if second son Xiao insists on seeing His Majesty, why don't you accept your punishment first? Xiao family is already guilty. If second son Xiao is willing to go all out and His Majesty sees it, the anger in His Majesty's heart may dissipate a little. This old man will also speak up for second son Xiao. Please advise me, Official Su. You're still young and it's difficult for you to bear more punishment. Go and receive 50 paddles first. He said. These words were said very casually, as if Xiao Ju was already very lenient. The palace servant next to him lowered his head and did not speak, but he could not hide the surprise in his heart. 50 paddles, if one's body was weak, would be enough to kill. Even if it was an ordinary person, 50 paddles would take half their life. It would be difficult for them to recover without recuperating for at least a year. Xiao Ju said, okay. Su Jingfu smiled, second son Xiao is indeed like his father. He turned and ordered his servants, take second son Xiao away to receive his paddles. In the night rain, 50 paddles fell on a person. It was not as easy as imagined, especially the palace servant who carried out the punishment. Su Jingfu had specially instructed him. The youth did not make a sound. He gritted his teeth and endured it. After 50 paddles, he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly propped himself up to stand up. When he stood up, his footsteps were a bit weak and he almost fell. The palace servant next to him could not bear to see him like this. Back then, second son Xiao was dressed in brocade and fox fur. He was elegant and gorgeous. Who would have expected him to be in such a sorry state? No one would have expected this. Su Jingfu was not interested in watching Xiao Ju receive his paddles. He entered the hall and first went to speak with Emperor Wenxuan. Emperor Wenxuan said, "Didn't you say you wanted to chase him away?" "Your Majesty," Su Jingfu shook his head, "second son Xiao insisted on seeing your Majesty." This old official could not persuade him otherwise. Young people are full of vigor. If they really want to do something, even 9 bulls cannot pull them back. Now that General Guangwu is no longer here, and his mother, this old official also feels sorry for him. "Your Majesty, why don't you see him and hear what he has to say? If he doesn't speak well, ask him to leave. Next time, we won't meet again." Emperor Wenxuan sighed, "My dear official, your heart has softened. It is your Majesty's kindness." "Forget it," Emperor Wenxuan ordered the palace servant, "in any case, I have watched him grow up. Ask him to come in." The outside of the hall was extremely cold, but the inside of the hall was extremely warm. There was no place to hide from the night rain. There was only the fragrance of flowers that made people dizzy. The lights were bright, and someone walked in. He knelt down in front of Emperor Wenxuan and said, "This official kowtows in salute to your Majesty. No need for formalities." Emperor Wenxuan said casually. He raised his eyes to look at Xiao Ju. When he saw Xiao Ju, he was stunned and asked, "How did you become like this?" It had been raining outside. The umbrella that Su Jingfu asked the servant to hold up only lasted for less than 15 minutes. His entire body was wet and he looked extremely miserable. Because he had just been hit 50 times, his body was extremely weak. His face was pale and his lips were pale. It seemed like he would faint at any moment. He was completely different from before. After all, he had watched him grow up. Emperor Wenxuan couldn't help but feel compassion for him. He was genuinely concerned. He softened his tone and said, "Tell me, did someone bully you?" "No." Su Jingfu stood at the side and answered, "Second young master Xiao knows that the Xiao family is guilty. He took the 50 strikes to make himself feel better. He also wants your Majesty to know that the Xiao family is remorseful." Emperor Wenxuan looked at him and sighed, 50 strikes, is too much. "Second young master Xiao is also grateful for your Majesty's kindness," Su Jingfu said with a smile. "Why did you come to find me?" Emperor Wenxuan said, "I don't want to talk about the Xiao family anymore." Xiao Ju's gaze swept across the chessboard on the table. On the chessboard, the black and white pieces intertwined. Under the warm light, it was gloomy and cold. Just like how life was strange, no one could predict what would happen in the future. But the past was the past. Since it was impossible to predict, the future could only be created. The young man prostrated himself. His voice was calm, but with an unstoppable stubbornness, he said word by word. "This official begs for your Majesty's permission. I am willing to personally lead the southern army into Mingshui and fight against the southern barbarians." Chapter 117. Your Majesty, please allow me to personally lead the Nan Fu army into Mingshui and fight against the southern barbarians. The light flickered, and the sound of rain hitting the ground could be heard. The young man bowed. After a while, Emperor Wenxuan said slowly, "Do you know what you are saying? The southern barbarians bullied the people of the Central Plains. Now that my father is dead, I am willing to carry on my father's legacy and enter the southern barbarians again to take back Mingshui." Emperor Wenxuan did not speak, but Su Jingfu spoke first. He said, "Second young master Xiao, although I can understand your grief and anger at the passing of General Guangwu, leading the army into battle is not something that can be done with just a few words. Seeing that Emperor Wenxuan did not intend to stop him from speaking, Su Jingfu continued, in the Battle of Mingshui, General Guangwu was obstinate and self-opinionated. He caused thousands of Dawei soldiers to die at Mingshui. Your Majesty is benevolent and did not pursue the matter. Now that you are here tonight, it is not to ask for forgiveness, but for military power. Xiao Ju said in a low voice, I am doing this for the people of Dawei. The people of Dawei. Su Jingfu shook his head. Second young Master Xiao is only 16 years old and has never been on the battlefield before. There are many generals in Dawei that do not dare to lead the army into battle. You are just a little kid, don't be too arrogant. Go back. Emperor Wenxuan said, do not mention this again. The young man paused and looked at Emperor Wenxuan. I am willing to make a military pledge. If I am defeated, I am willing to accept any punishment. Every word was powerful and resonant. Xiao family's second young Master Xiao's eyes had always been beautiful. They were as clear as the autumn water, but they always had a hint of laziness. Now, the laziness in his eyes had disappeared. It was as if something had sunk down, and something had gradually floated up. It made people feel as if they were burning. It was hard to ignore. A military pledge is easy. Su Jingfu said, but second young Master Xiao, if you are defeated, it is just a life. To others, war is not a child's play. Because of General Guang Wu's defeat at Mingshui, Great Wei's vitality has been greatly damaged. Now, because of your words, you want to use the tens of thousands of Nan Fu soldiers as a wager? He stroked his beard, shaking his head and sighing, Great Wei cannot afford to lose. Xiao Ju was silent for a moment. I wouldn't dare. Su Jingfu's eyes. Xiao Ju of the southern barbarians invaded my land. And my father died, I do not want to live. I hope your Majesty allow me to lead the army. Without seeing the news of victory, this subject does not dare to speak rashly. However many soldiers your Majesty is willing to give this subject will take that many. Even if I die on the battlefield, this subject will have no regrets. His attitude was stubborn, and he had the determination to stake everything on one throw. It seemed that as long as Wen Xuandi did not agree, he would kneel here and never get up. Emperor Wenxuan rubbed his temples. I do not want to talk about this again. Your Majesty is benevolent. The young man's voice did not back down. Your Majesty. Su Jingfu spoke. Second young Master Xiao is determined to go to the southern barbarians to fight. He has a pure heart. Emperor Wenxuan looked at him. What, you want to speak for him? Su Jingfu hurriedly said, I do not dare. It is just that. Second young Master Xiao is so confident in himself. Maybe there will be a miracle. It's just that the Great Wei does not dare to gamble with tens of thousands of southern prefecture soldiers, so. So what? Emperor Wenxuan asked. 3,000. Xiao Ju raised his head. There were hundreds of thousands of southern barbarians. 3,000 against 100,000. No one would accept this proposal. This was a war they would lose. Emperor Wenxuan took a sip of tea. He understood. Su Jingfu made this request on the surface to make Xiao Ju back down. Bringing 3,000 soldiers to fight the southern barbarians was not forcing him. It was a fool's dream. As long as Xiao Ju did not want to die, he would not agree. He put down the teacup in his hand and looked at the stubborn young man. Xiao Huaijin, if you insist on going, I will only give you 3,000 soldiers. Are you still willing to go? Su Jingfu hid his hands in his sleeves and watched from the sidelines. He would not agree. The young man slowly lowered his head and kowtowed to Emperor Wenxuan. This subject thanks your Majesty for your grace. Everyone in the hall was stunned. When Xiao Ju raised his eyes again, his expression was calm. A monarch does not joke. 3,000 it is. The heavy snow pressed down on the bare branches, and with a crack, the branches broke. Lin Shuanghe was in a daze. It had been a long time since he found out that Xiao Zhu had brought 3,000 soldiers to Mingshui. It had been so long that the Battle of Guo City and the scholars had cursed Xiao Zhu behind his back. It had been so long that Xiao Huaijin had become De Wei's god of war, General Fengyun. It had been so long that the two of them had not seen each other for 2 years. The affairs of the world were unpredictable and there were many different opinions. However, no one knew how the young man felt when he left the city with 3,000 soldiers and found out that he was facing an army of 100,000. Xiao Rubi did not know that Xiao Zhu had drugged him and entered the palace in the middle of the night to ask for 3,000 soldiers. He thought that the emperor had handed the southern barbarians to Xiao Zhu and that Xiao Zhu had temporary military power. Everyone cursed Xiao Zhu behind his back. They cursed him for fighting for power. They cursed him for entering the palace before the 7th day of his mother's death. They cursed him for deceiving the emperor and handing the southern barbarians to a young man. How ridiculous was that? Who was the one who was being ridiculous? How ridiculous was this world? Xiao Zhu left the city in the middle of the night. No one knew the look in his eyes before he left, and no one knew what he was thinking. Countless interesting things happened in the capital every day. Some people sighed at the Xiao family's misfortune, while others took pleasure in it. However, it only lasted for a few days. After a month, there were very few people who mentioned it. After a few more months, it had long been forgotten by people. Until the news of the Battle of Long Valley came. Second young Master Xiao had led the southern barbarians to take down Guo City and drown 60,000 southern barbarians. The whole nation was shocked. They were shocked by the young man's surprise attack and how ruthless he was at such a young age. Everyone thought that he could have used a gentler method to capture the captives. Who knew that there were civilians among the 60,000 who drowned? But what could they do? 3,000 against 100,000. He Yan rubbed a small bump on the bamboo stick and pressed it gently. His hand hurt. He has no other choice. Lin Shuanghe smiled. That's right. No one would use such a method unless they were forced into a dead end. The southern barbarians were stationed in Guo City. Xiao Zhongwu had been attacking for a long time, but he couldn't defeat them. Now that he had 3,000 soldiers, it was even more impossible for him to fight them head-on. Xiao Zhu ordered the 3,000 soldiers to secretly build a dam 100 miles east of Guo City to block the water from the East Mountain Long Valley. When the water accumulated and turned into a vast ocean, he ordered the dam to be breached. Fei Nu asked, "Young master, you must think carefully. If this goes on, everyone will curse you behind your back. Even if they won by drowning Guo City, it would leave a cruel mark in the history books." All the generals and soldiers had always wanted to be remembered in history and be famous for 1,000 years. Moreover, the emperor advocated benevolence and didn't like to kill indiscriminately. This kind of victory meant that they had to bear more than they could gain. The young man sat under a tree and looked in the direction of Guo City in the distance. He stroked a weed in front of him and said self-mockingly, "Do I have any other choice?" Fei Nu didn't speak. "It doesn't matter what others say about me." He stood up, his black cloak leaving a trail behind him. "Open the dam." Fei Nu didn't speak or move. The young man walked forward and said coldly, "I said, open the dam." Thousands of feet of water flowed down. Guo City was submerged. The water poured in from the east and came out from the west. The barbarian soldiers and civilians in the south couldn't escape. All 60,000 people drowned. The city fell, and Xiao Zhu won without a fight. When the news reached the imperial court, Emperor Wenxuan was also shocked. After Xiao Zhongwu's death, the officials who supported the Xiao family were suppressed by Prime Minister Su's party. Now that Xiao Zhu had won, they could hold their heads up high. Xiao Zhu took the opportunity to submit a letter asking Emperor Wenxuan to hand over the southern house soldiers to him so that he could wipe out the southern barbarians in one go. Emperor Wenxuan delegated power bit by bit. Xiao Zhu's victories were also won one battle after another. In the past few years, the southern barbarians had been defeated by him again and again. In the end, they were utterly defeated. The young man who led 3,000 people out of the city alone at night had finally become the frightening General Feng Yun in the eyes of the world. No one cared about the truth anymore. What people cared about was the fact that he had been greedy for military exploits, treated human lives like grass, and slaughtered at will. What he cared about was that he was arrogant, domineering, and looked down on everyone else. He even chopped down the only son of the Minister of Revenue without any mercy. But was he willing to be like this? When they were young, they went to school together in the Xianchang school and read, "The young man has his own arrogance. He despises the Kunlun sect and laughs at Lu Yang. He sharpened his sword for many years and showed his edge today." How spirited and handsome he was. In the years that followed, he was no longer as bright as he was then. The handsome young man in a white robe and a silver crown became the jade-faced killing general in black clothes and black armor. This was not something to be celebrated. From the beginning to the end, he was just one person. The snow fell even harder. It was so heavy that just by standing on the spot, one could already feel the chill. Their feet would leave clear footprints on the snow, but it wouldn't be long before they would be covered by the snow, leaving no traces behind. I don't know. At that time, the governor only led 3,000 people in the Battle of Guo City, He Yan said. Do you know how the 9 Flags Battalion came to be? Lin Shuanghe asked. He Yan shook his head. His Majesty asked the Xiao Zhu to pick 3,000 people from the South Mansion army. This was his last mercy to Huaijin. Huaijin stood in front of the South Mansion army and asked them to choose whether they were willing to follow him to Mingshui. Before they went, no one thought that they would win the battle. They were going to die. Everyone who stood out had the determination to die and followed the general's son. The first 800 people who stood out later became the 9 Flags Battalion, he said with a smile. No wonder. He Yan understood why the Xiao Zhu did not easily accept people into the 9 Flags Battalion. No matter how outstanding, brave, smart, and capable they were, they could not compare to the friendship they had built up in the past. Even if they were injured in the 9 Flags Battalion and could not go to the battlefield again, the Xiao Zhu would help them settle down. Because it was worth it. I didn't know about this at that time. Lin Shuanghe reached out and brushed away a snowflake that had landed on his body. Later, when grandfather was treating the Empress Dowager told him about it. Grandfather then told me that there were many rumors in the imperial court. After piecing them together, we formed the original outline of the situation. Didn't military governor Xiao tell you about this? He Yan asked. She remembered that when she entered the Xianchang school, Xiao Zhu, Lin Shuanghe, and another young man were very close. When Xiao Zhu was in trouble, he would tell his friend about it. To be honest, I only met him a few times in the past few years. Lin Shuanghe shook his head. The few times he wrote to me, he wanted to borrow money. Borrow money? You didn't expect that, right? When Lin Shuanghe said this, his tone became more relaxed. Xiao family's original silver was confiscated when General Guangwu was killed. When he led the troops to the south 2 years ago, he didn't have enough resources. Xiao family's eldest brother was an honest official. He couldn't bear to squeeze his brother dry, so he came to me. Our Lin family's medicine shops are all over the Dewey. We are loved by many noble ladies in the capital. He treated me as his father and gave him pocket money. He Yan, even though he won many battles these years and got a lot of rewards and spoils of war, it's still not enough compared to what I borrowed from him. Lin Shuanghe smiled. Of course, I'm very generous. If he can't pay me back, then forget it. He Yan. It's good to have a friend like you. These words were said with sincerity. Lin Shuanghe waved his hand modestly. You're too kind. That's why I was surprised when Xiao Zhu sent me a letter asking me to come to Liangzhou. Did the governor ask Dr. Lin to come to Liangzhou? He Yan asked curiously. That's right. The letter said that one of his confidants had an eye injury and asked me to come and treat it. I thought it was Fei Nu Chi Wu who was injured. Halfway there was a letter saying that the person's eye had recovered. Since I couldn't turn back halfway, I heard that he was in Qingnan. So I changed my route and went there to meet him. I also followed him to the Liangzhou guard to see where he lives now. He Yan was surprised. Xiao Zhu's letter said, confidant with an eye injury. It must be her. She had been injured by the assassin at Sun Xiangfu's banquet. However, she quickly realized that it wasn't serious. At that time, she didn't know that Xiao Zhu had already asked Lin Shuanghe to come and treat her. Although Lin Shuanghe only looked at women, he was Lin Qingtan's grandson. His medical skills were superb and no one dared to look down on him. This person wasn't as heartless as he made himself out to be. As the two of them talked, they had already arrived at He Yan's door. Here. Lin Shuanghe handed He Yan a robe. You can give this to him. He Yan. Why me? Lin Shuanghe thought for a moment. Because Xiao Huijin must be in a bad mood right now. If I go and join in the fun, I'll be scolded. But you're different. He leaned closer to He Yan and whispered, if a cute and obedient girl goes, he'll control his temper and won't make things difficult for you. He Yan's lips twitched. Dr. Lin, do you think military governor Xiao is the kind of person who'll have tender feelings for the fairer sex? Moreover, in Xiao Zhu's mind, she wasn't cute and obedient at all. Of course, why wouldn't he be? Lin Shuanghe looked at her with a smile and gently pushed her into the room. He didn't chase you out of the Liangzhou guards immediately after discovering your identity. This proves that he treats you well. Go, be careful. Don't fall. He Yan, wait. I'll come see you tomorrow. He Yan was pushed into his room. The door was closed behind him, and the room was empty. The food that Qing Lisu and Song Tao Tao had brought over was still by the bed. He Yan walked over with the support of a stick and sat down on the bed. The black robe was next to his hand. He Yan looked at the other side of the door. He wondered if Xiao Zhu was there right now. If she was, wouldn't it be a bit awkward for her to just give him the food? The window was open, and the salt-like snow drifted into the room with the wind. The young governor stood in front of the window and looked at the wind and snow outside. In the dungeon, Lei Ho's words rang in his ears. The snow grew heavier and heavier, almost blinding his eyes. The light in his eyes gradually dimmed. When he was young, he had learned martial arts from a master in the mountains. Before he left the mountains, the master had said to him, "You will walk on a very difficult path. You must walk on alone and never look back." He was young then and didn't understand what this meant. It wasn't until the huge waves of fate came crashing down and overturned the boat that carried the youth's hopes. As he floated alone in the sea, he suddenly understood. So that's how it was. Xiao Zhongwu only had 2 sons. Xiao Jing was like a flawless white jade, pure and noble. How could he participate in this kind of thing? If one of them had to walk on this path and bear the burden of murder, misunderstanding, infamy, and loneliness, why not let him do it? He didn't care. So many years had passed. He didn't care about misunderstandings, nor was he afraid of being questioned. How could he lose something he had never owned? But this kind of snowy day was too cold. Creak, a sound came from behind him. Xiao Zhu turned around and a head popped out from behind the door. He Yan struggled to walk in with a stick, holding his pajamas in his hands. "Sorry," the youth said sincerely, "I just knocked on the door, but you didn't respond, so Xiao Zhu, so you picked the lock and came in uninvited?" He Yan said embarrassedly, "Don't be angry, we're all neighbors." She sneezed, "Achoo, why didn't you close the window, it's so cold. How could she say something like, we're all neighbors, so calmly? Xiaoju didn't bother to pay attention to her and closed the window. He Yan also felt wronged. She knocked on the door for a long time, but Xiaoju ignored her. She thought that Xiaoju wasn't home. She thought that it was good that she didn't bump into Xiaoju when he was in a bad mood. She might as well use this opportunity to secretly pick the lock, sneak in, put down the pajamas, and leave. She didn't have to think about how to comfort him when they met. But this person was in the house, and he still ignored her. It was too disrespectful. Commander-in-Chief, your pajamas. He Yan handed the pajamas to him. Xiaoju looked at her, just put it on the couch. He Yan said, oh, and put it on the couch. She then sat down on a stool in the house. She saw that this person was still standing in the same place, thinking about something. She guessed that he was still upset about what Lei Ho said in the dungeon. She couldn't help but sympathize with him. During her years in the Fuyue army, she didn't know that Xiaoju had such a difficult life. If it was her, then so be it. He Yan never felt that she was special, but if this kind of thing happened to Xiaoju, then she felt that the heavens were too cruel. It turned out that God wasn't Xiaoju's biological father. He had to take away what he had given her. He was even an unscrupulous businessman who never made a loss. She tried to find something to talk about. Commander-in-Chief, I see that your pajamas are really beautiful. Where did you buy it? How much did it cost? Xiaoju said, the palace gave it to me. He Yan, this person obviously didn't want to talk to her anymore. That was why he deliberately made it difficult for her to continue the conversation. He Yan hesitated whether to leave or not. She thought about the medicine that Xiaoju gave her when she was injured and sighed in her heart. She was a person who would take revenge for revenge and repay kindness for kindness. Now that Xiaoju was in a bad mood, it would be disloyal to her if she left just like that. Commander-in-Chief, the wound on my waist hurts. He Yan changed the topic, trying to attract his attention to something else. Will it leave any side effects in the future? Hurts. Xiaoju sat down in front of the table and said indifferently, I see that you can get out of bed and walk around. It shouldn't be a big problem. He Yan, she said, Commander-in-Chief, you can't vent your dissatisfaction with Lei Ho on me. This person was like a firecracker now. She couldn't even talk properly. Xiaoju flipped through the pages in front of him and said without turning his head, you think too much. He Yan looked at him. It was probably the report sent by the Yangzhou guards about the attack on Rida Musi and the number of casualties. He sat in front of the table and carefully flipped through it. Xiaoju didn't have it easy. He Yan thought to himself. He first went to Qingnan and rushed back with the Nanfu army. He led the army to destroy Rida Musi's soldiers and then helped the injured soldiers settle down. Then he went to interrogate Lei Ho. After that, he was scolded by Lei Ho. Now he came back to continue reading the military report. He didn't stop for a moment. He Yan was injured, but at least he had a good night's sleep. This person, on the other hand, didn't rest from beginning to end. But when he was in the Xianchang Hall, he liked to laze around. So even Xiaoju couldn't avoid it. His back was always as straight as a tree, as if he would never get tired. But in fact, he would get tired. He Yan sat in the chair and looked at his back. He said, Commander-in-Chief, don't take Lei Ho's words to heart. He Yan didn't hear Xiaoju's reply, but he didn't care. He continued, he's the enemy. Of course he's happy to see you angry. Those words were purposely said to anger you. You're not the only one who was scolded. He also scolded me. He called me a sissy. He Yan started to talk nonsense again. He also said that I have a hidden disease and that my fiancé will run away with someone sooner or later. I'm all alone and will end up in the east of the city with no one to buy tofu. This kind of consolation was really lame. After He Yan finished speaking, he felt that he didn't put in the effort. But what could she do? She was rarely comforted by others, so she didn't know how to comfort others. There was no right or wrong in some things. You had to make the right decision based on your position. Outsiders couldn't understand the feeling of shouldering everything alone. It wasn't a good feeling. She had experienced it before. So she could understand Xiaoju's feelings. Xiaoju still couldn't be bothered with him. Her eyes didn't move away from the military report in front of her. He Yen stood up, leaned on the staff, and walked to his side with difficulty. Her right hand clenched into a fist and landed on his desk. "I'll give you something," she said. "I'm leaving." She slowly dragged her feet back to her room and closed the door. After He Yen left, Xiaoju stopped what she was doing and looked at the table. There was a sesame candy lying on the spot where her palm was just now. It looked very sweet. Chapter 118. After the incident with Raidamuzi, the Liangzhou guards were very busy for a period of time. After the new soldiers who died in battle were buried, their names were recorded in the military registry. When they returned to the capital in the future, they had to pay compensation to the families of the new soldiers. The new soldiers who died were all sentinels, and most of them were still very young. They had died in battle less than a year after coming to the Liangzhou guards. Their companions who spent all their time together were also very depressed for a period of time. However, even though they were depressed, their days still had to go on. Especially after this incident, the Liangzhou guards were not as safe as before. Xiaoju ordered Chief Instructor Shen to begin training the new formations. If they really encountered an enemy, the new soldiers had to learn how to set up formations to be able to kill the enemy. Not all of the Nanfu soldiers had arrived in Liangzhou. When Xiaoju rushed back from Qingnan, she brought 10,000 Nanfu soldiers with her. The Nine Flags Battalion remained in Qingnan and did not follow. Now that Liangzhou city had become the target of public criticism, it was not a good time to be in the limelight. The Nanfu soldiers' daily training was different from the Liangzhou guards' daily training. Just as Xiaoju said, the length and amount of daily training was 3 times that of the Liangzhou guards. Every time the new soldiers of the Liangzhou guards saw the Nanfu soldiers' daily training, they couldn't help but sigh in admiration. In an instant, the originally empty training grounds became lively. At the foot of White Moon Mountain, by the Wulu River, there were soldiers everywhere. He Yan's injuries were also getting better day by day. Lin Shuanghe's medical skills were much more exquisite than Shin Mushue's. He originally thought that such an injury would take him a year or so to recover. Now, at this rate, He Yan felt that he could still go to the training grounds and jump around in 2 months. Song Tao Tao placed the soup in front of He Yan. After watching He Yan drink it all, she took the bowl and left. The little girl didn't know how to cook, so she went to the head of the soldiers and used her status as a young miss to rob them. The food she robbed was to feed He Yan. He Yan sometimes felt like he was living off a woman. At first, he was a bit embarrassed, but after a while, he became used to it. After all, the soup was delicious. It would be even better if the little girl didn't look at her as if she was looking at her own treasure. From the other side of the room, a faint voice could be heard. It seemed to be Liang Ping's, and he sounded a little excited. He Yan thought about it for a while, then got up and got out of bed with the help of a stick. She took out a silver thread from her sleeve and inserted it into the lock. She had done this kind of thing many times, so it was a walk in the park for her. Fortunately, Xiaoju turned a blind eye to her behavior and did not change the lock to a more complicated, character. Xiaoju's important documents were probably not in this room, which was why it was so loose. He Yan pushed open the door slightly and saw a person kneeling in front of Xiaoju. It was Du Mao, whom he had not seen for a long time. Ever since the incident with Raidamuzi, Lei Ho's identity as a spy was exposed. As Lei Ho's relative, the original sponsor, Du Mao, had disappeared without a trace. He Yan heard Qing Lisu say that Du Mao seemed to have been locked up. He Yan could understand. Since Lei Ho was a spy, no one could guarantee that Du Mao was innocent. Now that Du Mao appeared here, it was probably because the injustice had been cleared. In addition to the kneeling Du Mao, there was also a group of instructors standing in the room. He Yan saw Liang Ping step forward and plead, "Commander-in-Chief, Instructor Du and Lei Ho haven't seen each other for many years." He really didn't know that Lei Ho was a spy. "Please, Commander-in-Chief, give him a way out." "That's right, Commander-in-Chief," Ma Damei couldn't help but say. "Instructor Du has been in the Yangzhou Guards for 10 years and has never made a single mistake. If Lei Ho didn't intentionally hide it, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Please, Commander-in-Chief, take into account Instructor Du's hard work for so many years and give him a lighter punishment." The other instructors all agreed and pleaded for Du Mao. Du Mao had been in the Yangzhou Guards since he was in his 20s. He had stayed in the bitter cold for 10 years. There wasn't much to play around in the guard station. At most, the instructors would gather together to drink wine during festivals. What they did on a daily basis was either training soldiers or guarding the station. The instructors had deep friendships and naturally didn't want to see Du Mao lose his life because of Lei Ho. They couldn't bear it and came to plead for leniency. Shen Han's lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. It wasn't that he didn't have a deep relationship with Du Mao, but even though they had only known each other for less than a year, Shen Han knew that the second young master Xiao in front of him wasn't someone who would change his mind because of someone else's words. As expected, Xiao Ju didn't pay attention to what the others were saying. He looked at Du Mao and said, "What do you plan to do?" He Yan still remembered that when he had first arrived at the Yangzhou Guards, this instructor Du Mao had a good relationship with Liang Ping and often argued with Liang Ping. Among the instructors, he was considered young. Now, in just a few short days, he seemed to have aged 10 years. A few strands of white hair had sprouted from his temples, and his expression had aged considerably. Du Mao opened his mouth, unable to hide the exhaustion in his voice. Du Mao is willing to accept punishment. Du Mao. Liang Ping anxiously called out his name. "I didn't find out Lei Ho's current status before rashly recommending him to the guard station. This is dereliction of duty," Du Mao said. "It is only right for the governor to punish me." "You are indeed dereliction of duty," Xiao Ju said calmly. "Because of you, many new recruits have died in the Yangzhou Guards." The instructors who wanted to continue persuading him stopped in their tracks and didn't dare open their mouths. "The dead cannot be revived," Xiao Ju said. "Do you understand?" Du Mao understands. The room was silent. Liang Ping looked at Du Mao with a look of despair. "I won't take your life." As soon as he said this, everyone in the room was stunned. He Yan was also stunned. Xiao Ju said, "You can leave. Governor, from today onwards, you are no longer an instructor of the Yangzhou Guards." Xiao Ju stood up and walked out of the room. "You don't have to come back in the future." His figure disappeared outside the room. After a moment of silence, Ma Damei finally came to her senses and pulled Du Mao, who was still kneeling on the ground. Okay. The governor has shown you mercy. Hurry up and get up." Du Mao stood in a daze and suddenly began to wail. Everyone in the room comforted him and Du Mao's cries. The noise made He Yan's head hurt. She grabbed her clothes and casually put them on. Leaning on a stick, she followed him out of the room. As soon as she stepped out, she shivered from the cold wind and snow outside. "Where's Xiao Ju?" He Yan looked around. This person had just left the room. How could she be gone now? Could she fly? "Looking for me?" Someone's voice came from behind. He Yan was so scared that she gasped and almost dropped the stick in her hand. She turned around and saw Xiao Ju standing behind her. She raised her eyebrows and stared at her. "What's the matter?" "No, nothing." He Yan pretended to look at the sky. "The weather is very good. I came out for a walk." Xiao Zhu glanced at the sand like snow outside and said mockingly, I thought you didn't eavesdrop enough and wanted to ask me something in person. He actually knew that she was eavesdropping. That was awkward. He Yan scratched her head. The governor's hearing is very good. Xiao Zhu smiled. Not as good as yours. Tell me, he asked, why are you looking for me? Why was she looking for him? He Yan didn't know either. She just followed him out subconsciously. She was speechless for a moment. After thinking for a while, she said, Governor, you still showed mercy to Instructor Du. It was one thing for the instructors to have a close personal relationship with Du Mao, but it was another thing for Du Mao to make a mistake. He Yan thought that with Xiao Zhu's personality, Du Mao wouldn't be able to escape death. Wasn't the Western Chang rebellion quelled by General Fei Hong a long time ago? Where did the Chang tribe get so many soldiers? Tens of thousands of soldiers. Did the Chang tribe have so many soldiers now? He Yan had fought with Raida Muji before and was very familiar with the Chang tribe situation. He felt that something was wrong. It's not the Chang tribe. Xiao Zhu rarely answered He Yan's question. It's Yudo. Yudo? This time, He Yan really didn't expect it. Xiao Zhu glanced at her and saw her surprised expression. She said lightly, what do you think? Was she testing her? He Yan asked, is Raida Muzi a Yudo? Xiao Zhu was speechless for a moment before saying, he's not a Yudo, but other than Raida Muzi and a few of your trusted subordinates, the rest of the soldiers are Yudo. Commander-in-Chief, are you sure? Xiao Zhu walked forward unhurriedly. I'm sure. If it's really a Yudo, He Yan's voice was serious. Then what the Yudo wants is not just a Liangzhou guard. What do you mean? In recent years, the Yudo kingdom has raised soldiers and is very powerful. They always harass the people at the border with the intention of testing us. Now that they've come to the Liangzhou guard, they use the Chang tribe as an excuse to hide themselves in the dark. They want to use the Chang tribe's name to run amok in Dawei. Commander-in-Chief, think about it. If you really went to Zhangtai and couldn't save them in time, when those Yudo took over the Liangzhou guard and took over the city, Liangzhou city would be taken over by the Yudo. It would be like tearing a hole in Dawei's border. They could go all the way west and follow the river until they reached the capital. Xiao Zhu looked up. That's all. I'm afraid there's a traitor in Dawei. He Yan said, this person has Yudo connections and is an old acquaintance of the commander-in-chief. Xiao Zhu said, continue. To be able to secretly plant a trusted aide in the Liangzhou guard and spread fake news in Zhangtai, this person's status is not low and he has a wide network. He knows that the commander-in-chief is impregnable in the Liangzhou guard, so he first lured you away. This person must be very afraid of you. Therefore, He Yan looked at Xiao Zhu. Perhaps there is such a person who has a very high position in the imperial court and has fought with the governor in the past but did not gain any advantage. If there is such a person, there is an 80 to 90% chance that he did it. Xiao Zhu stared at him and said, then why don't you tell me who this person is? He Yan felt that it was really strange. Although he and Xiao Zhu were classmates, it was only for a year. After that, they hadn't seen each other for many years. One was in the south and the other was in the north. Because of Xiao Zhongwu's matter, Xiao Zhu was deeply embroiled in the whirlpool of the imperial court. However, she was a pure and innocent person who relied on military merits to forcefully rise in rank. Every day, she stayed in the border camp, so she didn't know much about the messy affairs of the imperial court. How could she guess who that person was? Even if it was an examination, it was too difficult. Not everyone was like him, who could sleep and become the number one in the Xianchang dojo. Thinking about Yuan Baozhen, He Yan said casually, Su Jingfu. Xiao Zhu was stunned. He Yan saw his expression and his heart jumped. It's really him. Xiao Zhu didn't answer. Su Jingfu actually colluded with the enemy and committed treason. He Yan was shocked. He's crazy. He's the prime minister of the court. What good would it do him to do such a thing? You can speak louder, Xiao Ju said indifferently. If there is no evidence, I can sue you any time for slandering an official of the court. He Yan thought, who isn't an official of the court? In her previous life, when she was a General Feihong, she was also paid by the government. But. She wanted to say something, but Xiao Ju had already stopped and walked forward. Not far away, the sound of soldiers shouting and getting into formation could be heard. Unknowingly, the two of them had already walked to the practice field. The practice field used to only be used by the Liang Province Guard recruits for daily training. Now, it was split into two sides. The east side was used by the Nanfu soldiers, while the west side was used by the Liang Province Guard. Now that both sides were training at the same time, the difference was obvious. The deputy commander of the Nanfu soldiers was practicing his footwork. He didn't need anyone to direct him. Just looking at him made people feel that he was brave and invincible. On the other hand, the Liang Province Guard recruits had just started learning how to get into formation. It was inevitable that they were a bit flustered. Shen Han stood on the high platform and shouted with all his might. He Yan looked and hesitated. They're practicing the fish scale formation. Xiao Ju glanced at her and asked, you know. It's here to test people again. He Yan didn't understand Xiao Ju's questions from time to time, but she thought that maybe he was trying to test whether she could enter the 9 Flags battalion. She could only answer seriously, they're distributed in echelons. The front part is slightly raised, and the main force is gathered in the center. Then, they're divided into small square formations shaped like fish scales. When facing the enemy, they can concentrate their forces to attack the center of the enemy formation. However, their weakness is at the rear. If the enemy breaks through from the rear, they can break this formation. It's a fish scale formation, but, she said, they're too loose. Too loose. If they were to slowly get into formation, they would have been killed 5 times over. Xiao Ju looked at her thoughtfully. Suddenly, she curled her lips and said, not bad. He Yan was very proud. Her hard work paid off. Who would have thought that she, who was the last in the Xianchang dojo in the past, was now so familiar with the art of war that she could easily answer the questions of the first in the Xianchang dojo. Her hair hadn't turned white in the war, and she hadn't wasted her time studying. You've learned the art of war? Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. I know a little. You know how to set up formations? You flatter me. Good. Xiao Ju looked at the soldiers training below the stage and said, if Demu Zi came to the Liangzhou guard that day and you weren't locked in the dungeon, and Shen Han gave you command of the army, how would you fight this battle? She was going to give him a question so soon. He Yan thought for a moment and said slowly, those Yudo soldiers are strong and vicious. The new recruits of the Liangzhou guard haven't been to the battlefield yet, so their morale is low. It's hard to fight them head-on, and it's not something that can be solved in a short time. If it was me, I would use the carriage formation. Xiao Ju looked at her calmly, go on. As the main general, I would be in the center of the formation. The soldiers outside would be arranged layer by layer. The soldiers would be scattered outside, forming a roving formation. When the battle starts, they would rotate in the same direction and take turns attacking the enemy's formation, just like a spinning wheel. In this way, if we don't constantly exert pressure on the enemy, the Yudo will collapse from exhaustion. Our side will be replenished and rested by taking turns to attack, and will recover our fighting strength. You're the main general. Xiao Ju mocked. What I mean is, I'll temporarily be the main general. The one who really needs to fight is still you, Commander. The reason why I chose the carriage formation is to stall for time so that you can rush back to support us, He Yan said sincerely. Xiao Ju turned around and bent down slightly. She looked down at her and smiled. Lady, he's learned the art of war well. It's a pity that he's not a general. No matter what, Xiaoju had a pretty good eye. He Yen nodded and said, I think so too. I feel that I was born to be a general. Sometimes, I even feel that I was a female general in my previous life. Xiaoju, Commander, you don't believe me? He Yen poked a hole in the snow with a stick. Or do you think that women can't be generals? I don't think so. He Yen raised her head and looked at him. Everyone thought that women should stay in the boudoir, embroider, draw eyebrows, and wait for their husbands to favor them. Not to mention being a female general, even if they were to appear in public as a female shopkeeper, a female teacher, or a female doctor, they would receive strange looks from many people. There were very few who could take that step. Even if they did, others would not understand. You can do whatever you want. The young man's eyes were lazy and the corners of his mouth twitched. As long as you can do it, it's fine. He Yen was stunned for a moment and stared at him without saying anything. His gaze fell on the training field in the distance and the recruits who were training. He did not see He Yan's gaze behind him. Thank you, He Yen said softly in her heart. The snow gradually stopped. The recruits led by Shinhan practiced a few times and were not as flustered as they were at the beginning. Seeing the initial results, Xiaoju and He Yen also stood here for a long time. A familiar voice sounded behind them. Huaijin. He. Brother. He Yen turned around and saw Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe climbed up to the attic and brushed the snow off his boots. No wonder I couldn't find you two anywhere. So you came here. He looked at Xiaoju and smiled mischievously. You brought our sister He here to watch the training? He Yen. Dr. Lin, please don't call me sister outside. I'm sorry, Lin Shuanghe covered his mouth with his fan and apologized. I forgot. But there are no outsiders here. He glanced at the stick He Yen was holding and asked, can you get out of bed and walk so far today? How is it, does your wound still hurt? It doesn't hurt too much, He Yen said. Dr. Lin's medical skills are superb. I feel much better today. That's great. Lin Shuanghe waved his fan. If I can't cure you, I will feel very guilty. The two of them complimented each other. Xiaoju looked on coldly from the side. She couldn't stand it anymore and said impatiently, if you have something to say, say it. Lin Shuanghe was stunned. Ah! I almost forgot about the important matter. Someone from the Liangzhou guards just came. I wanted to find Xinjiao, but Xinjiao wasn't here. It took me a long time to find you here. Who is it? Someone from the palace said that His Majesty will reward you for the great victory of the Liangzhou guards. Oh right, there's also that. He couldn't remember who it was. It took him a while to remember the name. The fourth son of Count Shi Jin's residence, Chu Xilan. That's right, Chu Xilan is here too. Chu Zhao. Xiaoju frowned. What's he doing here? Lin Shuanghe shrugged. How would I know? They're all waiting at the entrance of the guards. Aren't you going to take a look? Xiaoju paused, then walked down the stairs. Let's go. Ah, Commander-in-Chief, what about me? He Yen hurriedly leaned on his stick. He wanted to follow, but he didn't know if he could. Xiaoju didn't look like an old friend catching up. Xiaoju looked at him and said, you can go back. There's no need to follow. Oh. He Yen obediently agreed. Lin Shuanghe waved his hand at him. The two of them quickly went down the stairs, their figures disappearing into the distance. He Yen looked at the vast expanse of snow. He was a bit confused. Who exactly was this person called Chu Xilan? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.